Chapter 1280. Soon, a 3D model of the restaurant appeared in Meg's mind. On the surface, it looked similar to Amy's. It was also a two-story building, but the outer wall structure was more simple and streamlined. However, Meg still found it hard to associate it with a supersonic flying machine that could travel at 5 hertz. Meg used his mind to control the model and found 16 thrusters at the bottom of the restaurant. The thrusters were conceived by a science fiction writer in your country. If it is enlarged, it can theoretically propel the Earth forward. Of course, I have improved a little. It is not burning stone, but nuclear power, the system said proudly. Using this to propel the restaurant is really extravagant. Meg was speechless. It was a pity that he did not make it in time for the movie. He only saw the trailer before he transmigrated. This shouldn't be the flying mode, right? Meg asked again. The restaurant can switch to the flying mode in 3 seconds and take off in 5 seconds. The supersonic acceleration time is 10 seconds. This is the normal mode. Let's switch to the flying mode and see, Meg said in his mind. Switching to the flying mode, the restaurant model began to change. It gradually became round, with the lower end protruding and the upper end becoming small. The whole thing turned into the shape of a water droplet. The thrusters were all over the flying machine. Fuck, this flying machine is a little ugly. Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. Looking at the water droplet-shaped restaurant, he felt that it was a little familiar. This is the latest model of the flying house. It gathers the most advanced aviation technology. While achieving extreme speed, it also has a very rich operating space. For example, this, and this. Then Mag saw a shooting star scurrying madly in his mind. All right, stop your boring showing off. Meg rolled his eyes. He was dazzled. This system was really giving him a headache. Then, Meg clicked on the interior of the restaurant to take a look. The internal structure of the restaurant was similar to Amy's, but there was an option to change the style with one click. According to the requirements of the mission, the host can change the style of the restaurant with one click so that the restaurant can better integrate into the local area, the system quickly explained. This function is quite practical. Meg nodded. Although he didn't know what kind of mission the system would give him, it was equivalent to adding a changeable function to the restaurant, which would save him a lot of money. After exiting the restaurant, Meg closed his eyes and began to rest. Today, in order to perform for 15 minutes, he had seriously overdrawn his body. As soon as he lay down, exhaustion began to surge. City Lord's mansion. Roland looked at Michael and said softly, "It has been confirmed that 2 employees from Mamie's have returned. Irina has been eating at Mamie's for lunch and dinner." Michael pondered for a moment before looking at Michael. "What do you think? Rankster's daughter is now at Mamie's. A few days ago, that half-dragon girl seemed to have successfully awakened the bloodline of the Golden Dragon tribe and received Jinx's care. She should already have the ability to transform." "You mean the 2 giant dragons that appeared in the underground cavern were the 2 waitresses from Mamie's, and the appearance of those mysterious people is also related to Mamie's?" Michael frowned. Actually, we should have noticed long ago that Meg is a very mysterious person. Although some evidence pointed to him as a fugitive young master from a fallen family in Rodu, a thief caught by the Grey Temple yesterday inadvertently revealed something. That fugitive young master died outside Mamie's on a rainy night some time ago, but the Grey Temple and the City Lord's mansion didn't receive any reports related to this matter. The corners of Roland's mouth curled up slightly. Although he didn't mention Meg's appearance in Rodu gave people the impression that he was that fugitive young master. Is this really just a coincidence? Who do you think he is? Michael looked into Roland's eyes and lowered his voice even more. 4 years ago, the demons, the Magus Tower, and the elves worked together to set up a trap to kill Alex and completely cripple him. Not long after, news of his death spread. After 3 years, Alex appeared again and killed Benson, the spatial demon, at his peak power to save Irina. He announced his return, but there was an additional mask on his face. And, very coincidentally, Meg happened to be in Rodu at that time because he was invited by the Wrath King. An ordinary restaurant owner suddenly became concerned about the general situation of the world, and because the waitress of the restaurant asked us to help the night elves. And after we rejected them, Alex appeared in the underground cavern battlefield and killed Borg forcefully. Right after that, a golden dragon and a frost dragon descended with hundreds of mysterious powerhouses and defeated the army of the Wind Forest. And we seem to have forgotten one thing. Alex has his own name. Meg Alex. This is his full name, Roland said in a low voice as he looked into Michael's eyes. The secret chamber suddenly became quiet, and only the light from the oil lamp flickered slightly. Are you sure? Michael's voice was a little hoarse. He suddenly felt that his throat was a little dry. If Amy is the daughter of Meg and Irina, this can also explain why the elves worked together with the demons and the Magus Tower to kill Alex back then. The Elven Queen would never allow herself to be pregnant with a human's child. Alex changed his face and became the Chef Meg in Chaos City. Everything can be explained, but how did Alex become Mr. Mac? It's already a miracle that he was able to recover from his terrible injuries back then. Isn't it the biggest flaw in this deduction to be able to achieve such superb culinary skills in just 3 years? Michael shook his head in disbelief. Since he's Alex, what's impossible? Roland asked. Michael choked and was actually speechless. The secret chamber fell into silence again. Then what should we do now? Inform the world, or lay our cards on the table with him directly? Michael asked, although he didn't get Meg to admit it personally. Just like what Roland said, this possibility was already close to the truth. Neither of these two choices will do us any good. Roland shook his head with a smile and said, since Alex's philosophy is the same as ours, and he's clearly on our side, why should we lay everything out in the open? A poisonous snake hiding in the dark is easier to deal a fatal blow to the enemy. What we should do now is to help him hide better and help him cover up the traces that he's exposed. That's a good idea. Michael nodded with a smile. Chapter 1281. That night, the Norland continent was destined to be chaotic. A young thief was locked up in the 18th floor of the Batai prison because he said something he shouldn't. No one was allowed to come in contact with him. The Wind Forest fell into chaos because of Borg's death. Borg had left behind a huge foundation. Without a leader, how were the families in Borg's faction going to deal with themselves? Meanwhile, the elves at the bottom had some new ideas because of the miraculous victory of the Night Elves. The idea of fighting for freedom for the rest of their lives started to spread in the chaos. It was as if there was a mysterious force pushing it, and it started to spread like wildfire. Sally, the High Priest, asked me to take over Borg's position as the commander of the elves. The chance for the Brewster family to rise is here. Elliot walked around the room excitedly. He looked at Sally and said, soon, we will be able to replicate the glory of the Borg family and become the #1 family in the Wind Forest, and then be killed like Borg, and the whole family will be divided by those fellows who supported him in the past, Sally said with a cold expression. She looked at Elliot with disappointment. Elliot's expression froze, but he quickly turned to Sally with a smile and said, how can that be? I am different from Borg. He wants to be the king of the Wind Forest, but I don't. You will become the new princess of the Wind Forest soon. Then, you will be the king of the Wind Forest, and our Brewster family will become the new royalty of the Wind Forest. Sally pursed her lips and shook her head. Father, Princess Irina is not dead, and so is Alex. Furthermore, they have the support of a powerful force that is not weaker than the elves. This huge defeat has made the elves start to reflect on freedom and resistance. The false prosperity of the Wind Forest can't last much longer. Do you want to sink deeper and deeper? No, that's impossible, Elliot shouted with a little fanaticism. The Wind Forest will never lose. When have those slaves ever really obeyed us? But in the face of great power and the whip, how would they dare to resist? When you become the queen of the elves, I will still be the marshal of the elves. The Wind Forest and the Brewster family will gain great prosperity and glory. What if I don't support you? Sally pouted. Elliot was stunned. He looked at Sally and raised his voice. What did you say? What if I want those low-level elves to regain their freedom after I become the queen? Sally looked into Elliot's eyes and asked without averting her gaze. Pa! A crisp sound of a slap was heard. Sally covered her face and took 2 steps back. She looked at Elliot in disbelief. The father who had doted on her since she was young actually hit her? How dare you say such a thing? Do you know how much I've sacrificed for the glory of the Brewster family? I've forced Irina to leave, and I've forced Borg to his death. Everything is going to succeed, and the Brewster family is going to become the most glorious family in the Wind Forest. You wanted to give up? Elliot roared at Sally. Sally's eyes turned red when she saw Elliot's ferocious and crazy expression. This man was no longer the father who doted on her in every way. Profit and power had twisted him. Elliot looked at Sally, who was silent with her red eyes. He seemed to suddenly realize that his behavior was inappropriate. He quickly put down his hand and squeezed out a smile. Sally, I didn't hit you, did I? I didn't do it on purpose. I was just anxious and didn't control my emotions well. You know that I did this for you and for the family. Sally dodged Elliot's hand and shook her head slightly. I'm fine. I'm going to rest. She then turned and walked out of the door. How could I hit Sally? Elliot looked at Sally walking out of the door. He slapped his hand that was frozen in the air with self-reproach. However, a fanatical smile soon appeared on his face, and he began to pace around the room again as he murmured to himself, Once I take back my military power, Sally will ascend to the throne, and I'll be the true king of the Wind Forest. I'll do what Borg failed to do. The next morning, it wasn't the alarm clock that woke Meg up. Instead, it was 2 bell-like giggles. Meg, who was lying on a mattress on the floor, opened his eyes and saw 2 smiling faces lying on the side of the bed. One of them was big, and the other was small. Their bright smiles were like a spring breeze. He couldn't help but giggle foolishly. Father, your eyes look like a cat's. Amy drew a line along Meg's eyes with her finger. There was still some black carbon powder on her finger. I think the mustache looks pretty good, Irina said with a smile. She covered her mouth with her hand and drew a mustache on her upper lip. TSK, TSK. How can you bully the person with the lowest status in the family so early in the morning? How can you do that? Meg sat up and looked at the 2 of them helplessly. Although he was complaining, he couldn't stop smiling. Meg picked up Amy and rubbed his face against Amy's. He looked at her face, which had turned half black, and said with a smile, Now Amy has become a little black egg too. Wow, that's great. Amy giggled. Then she looked at Irina. Then, only Mother's face is clean now. No, I refuse. Irina rejected with a serious expression. However, Meg and Amy had already pounced on her. 10 minutes later, the 3 of them sitting on the messy little bed looked at each other's faces that had turned into big black cats and laughed at the same time. Ugly Duckling, who was sleeping at the end of the bed, opened its eyes in a daze when it heard the laughter. It jumped up from the bed with a meow and shrunk against the door, looking at the 3 of them in horror. All right, go brush your teeth and wash your face. We're going back to business today. Meg picked up Amy and walked to the bathroom with a smile. He didn't understand why he would play such a childish game and why he was so immersed in it. Life seems to have become more interesting. Irina looked at Meg and Amy's backs with a smile. This is the toothpaste, and this is the toothbrush. Squeeze the toothpaste on the toothbrush, and then brush your teeth up and down like this. Meg taught Irina how to use the toothbrush step by step. The family of 3 stood in front of the sink. Amy moved a little stool and stood in the middle, while Meg and Irina stood on either side. They looked at the synchronized movements in the mirror with smiles in their eyes. After putting on her favorite purple dress, Amy looked at Irina and Meg and said, Father, Mother, I found out that I have superpowers today. What? Irina asked with a smile. I like you guys so much. Chapter 1282. Meg and Irina looked at each other and smiled. The little girl's mouth was really sweet. Have you learned it? Irina asked Meg with a smile. I think you're a little strange today. Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. What's wrong? Irina touched her hair. Could it be that her hairstyle was messy? You're quite cute. Meg smiled. Irina was slightly taken aback, and then she couldn't help but laugh. She looked at Meg with sparkling eyes. He was a fast learner. What about me? What about me? Father, am I cute? Amy came up and pouted. She placed her little fists on both sides of her face and asked while blinking her big eyes. Yes, Amy is super cute too. Meg smiled and scratched Amy's nose. Then how should I tie my hair today? I want to tie my hair into a big bun again. Amy let Meg help her put on her shoes, and then she looked at Irina. Mother, can you help Amy? Of course. Irina nodded. She didn't expect Amy to like her hair so much. It seemed that her hair tying skills weren't as bad as she had thought. Amy has to go to school today. I think maybe we can tie a little low-key bun. Recently, the school has been looking for strange outfits. Why don't I do it today? Meg said weakly. The bird nest-like bun from yesterday left a deep impression on him. If she went to school with such a hairstyle, she would definitely be the center of attention. It was better to keep a low profile. Is that so? Irina was a little disappointed upon hearing that. Yes. Meg nodded. Seeing that Irina wasn't too happy, he said, but Amy will be studying at Master Julian's place tomorrow. It's just next door, and there won't be anyone else. Okay, then I'll tie Amy's hair tomorrow. Irina's eyes lit up, and she nodded. Then from now on, father and mother will do the same every day. That's great, Amy said happily. Meg carried Amy to the dressing table, took a wooden comb, and combed her hair neatly. He then picked up a rubber band from the box, and with a few nimble twirls of his fingers, he tied up a delicate and cute little bun. So fast? Also, it's so cute. Irina looked at Amy's hair, which had been tied up in the blink of an eye. It really looked like a small meatball, delicate and cute, and not messy at all. It was more than 100 times prettier than the big meatball she had used magic to style yesterday. Most importantly, Meg was so skilled that before she could even learn how to use her eyes, he had already tied up Amy's hair. Do you want to learn? Meg turned around and smiled at Irina. If I don't want to. Irina turned her head and said proudly, Then let's go downstairs. I'm going to make breakfast for the cleaners. Meg looked at the time. It was already 6 o'clock. Mother, why don't you let father tie up your hair for you? Amy walked beside Irina and stroked her long hair. Because some people only want to tie it up for you and don't even think about me. Irina looked at Meg's back and pursed her lips. Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. He had already sensed the jealousy that was gradually spreading behind him, and he suddenly felt a little wronged. He just felt that Irina's hair was so smooth and unique, and it looked more elegant with it draped over her shoulders. She didn't need any hair accessories or styling at all. Meg went downstairs, and Phyllis was already waiting outside the door. Princess, did you have a good rest last night? Phyllis asked with concern as she entered the dining room and looked at Irina. The princess was very familiar with the bed. If she wasn't familiar with the environment, she would often not be able to sleep well. I slept quite well. Irina nodded. The big, soft bed, the quilt with a faint floral fragrance, and the little cutie in her arms. She slept very well last night, and all her fatigue during this period was swept away. Phyllis looked at Irina's perfect complexion. She didn't look like she didn't have a good rest, so she was relieved. I'm going out after breakfast, Irina said casually as she took a sip of the warm water that Meg had poured for her. Is something the matter? Meg looked up and asked. I'll go with you, Phyllis said at the same time. Phyllis looked at Meg, then at Irina. Wasn't the princess talking to her? I'm going to find a place to set up the night elf's base. Bean Sprout, you don't have to go with me. Learn how to cook from him. You will be the head chef of the night elves in the future. Food is the main selling point of the night elves recruitment. Mag nodded and then said to Phyrus, Bean Sprout, you don't have to go with me. Head chef. Phyllis opened her mouth slightly. She suddenly felt a heavy burden on her shoulders. However, this was the princess' trust in her, so she had to work hard. She nodded seriously and said, I will work hard. The night elves had moved their base to Chaos City with the intention of amassing power here before waiting for an opportunity to counterattack the Wind Forest. Irina had told them about it yesterday. They really had to look for a place to settle down for over 1,000 people. Why don't I go with you after the restaurant closes? I'm more familiar with Chaos City, Meg said to Irina. It just so happens that I don't have any money with me. Irina nodded without hesitation. Boss, I will try my best to return the money needed to rent a place, Phyllis said hurriedly. She was a little worried that Mag would take this to heart and treat the princess as a scoundrel. Meg and Irina glanced at Phyllis at the same time with weird expressions. Although my salary is very low now, I will work hard, Phyllis said even more firmly as the two of them stared at her. They couldn't let the princess work, right? Let's talk about this in the future. I'm also willing to do my part for the night elves, Meg consoled. Boss, you're the best. Phyllis looked at Meg, touched. She didn't expect her boss to be willing to do so much for the night elves for her. She didn't know how to repay him. It's all right, it's all right. I'll go and cook first. Meg walked to the kitchen with embarrassment. The money he earned was for his wife. Did he have to write an IOU? Since Phyllis is back, does that mean I don't have to come to work anymore? I don't think I'm needed anymore, right? Camilla asked Meg after she arrived at the restaurant and glanced at Phyrus, who was slicing all the ingredients perfectly with her wind blades. We signed a 1-year contract. Because of the addition of the hot pot, the amount of ingredients used has also doubled. Now that Phyllis is back, your workload will be reduced by a lot. So, you better stay. Meg shook his head at Camilla. What a joke. The restaurant was lacking manpower now. How could he let go of such a labor force so easily? Chapter 1283. Yes. Didn't you tie the rope well? Irina smiled at Camilla. Camilla's expression froze. She glanced at Irina and tried to avoid her gaze. However, she was already roaring in her heart. Why is she still here today? Is she living in a restaurant? I'm sorry, Madam Camilla. I haven't cut vegetables in a restaurant for a long time, and my hands were itchy, so I didn't notice that I was taking up so much space. Like before, this half of the cutting table is yours. Phyllis also noticed Camilla's arrival and stepped aside to give up half of the space with a smile. Camilla looked at Meg with resentment. If not for the fact that the photo stone was in his hands, she would never give in so easily. After the morning service, Meg changed his attire and went out with Irina. Is there need to do this? Irina looked at the veil that was covering her face with a slight frown. After all, we are building a base. It's better to keep a low profile. Otherwise, it would seem too unprofessional. Meg pressed on his beard that was about to fall off. He waved his hand to hail a horse-drawn carriage and asked it to take them to the rental company. The rental company was also this world's real estate agent. The equal and stable environment created many forward-looking industries in Chaos City. It was really impossible to find such a well-stocked real estate agent in other places. The moment Mag and Irina stepped through the door, the beautiful and flirtatious succubus came up to them with a smile. She glanced at Mag and immediately smilingly said, "Sir, madam, please come in. May I know if you're here for the rental business or for the rental business? Of course, if you want to buy real estate, we also have a lot of real estate to choose from." Meg went straight to the point. We are looking for a big factory, and we intend to set up a large-scale workshop. If there is a suitable property, we intend to rent it for a long time or buy it directly. Miss Succubus's eyes lit up. This was a big deal. If she could sell a factory, she could buy another house in the city this month. She looked at Meg with a more gentle gaze. She didn't expect this young man to be a rich customer. Meg looked at Miss Succubus's perverted eyes and felt the coldness coming from beside him. He immediately took half a step back and pointed at Irina. "This is my boss." The succubus froze for a moment before apologizing awkwardly. Sorry, madam. I thought you were... Please forgive my recklessness and ignorance." "It's okay. Let's look at the house," Irina said coldly. She glanced at Meg with a smile. The feeling of being a boss was pretty good. Meg heaved a sigh of relief. As a qualified man, he had to be sensitive to the emotional changes of the woman beside him. Otherwise, he would be confused no matter how he made her angry. Miss Succubus glanced at Meg resentfully and quickly led Irina to the VIP area. "Please wait for a moment. I will go and get the housing information for you." Miss Succubus brought the two of them to an independent VIP box and said respectfully. Then she turned around and left. "Isn't a place to stay? Why do we have to choose a factory?" Only Meg and Irina were left in the room, and Irina was perplexed. There are over 1,000 night elves, and we can't fit all of them in a normal house. Furthermore, we don't know when we will be able to launch a counterattack. We have nothing to do in Chaos City, so we might as well find something for them to do and subsidize the night elves' military expenses. Meg smiled. He thought of this on his way here, and he had already thought of the specific business project. Irina thought for a while and felt that what Meg said made sense, so she nodded. Sorry to keep you waiting. Miss Succubus came over with 2 huge housing information books, and another Miss Succubus poured a cup of tea for Meg and Irina. Although that Miss Succubus had boasted about all the housing information, Meg didn't listen to her recommendation to buy a factory in the south of the city. Instead, he suggested that Irina buy a remote factory in the north of the city. Madam, are you sure you want to buy this factory? Although this factory is bigger, this area is still not mature, and there aren't many factories and residential areas nearby. I'm afraid it will be a problem to recruit workers, Miss Succubus said sincerely. The total price of this factory was only 5 million copper coins, and a factory of the same size in the south of the city would cost at least twice as much. I want this one. Irina shook her head and turned to look at Meg. Pay up. All right, boss. Meg nodded while holding back his laughter. This boss's style was really impressive. Don't you want to go and take a look at the factory? Miss Succubus asked. No need. Let's just buy it. Irina shook her head slightly. Miss Succubus saw that Irina had no intention to consider further, so she could only say to Meg, this way, please. Meg nodded slightly and followed that Miss Succubus downstairs to pay. Chaos City's property registration was very standard, but the agent had channels, so the property registration was completed in just one morning. This factory was now under Irina's name. Didn't you say you wanted to keep it a secret? Then why did you write my name on the property certificate? Irina looked at Meg perplexedly after they walked out of the agent's door. Anyway, there's so many elves gathered together, so I couldn't hide it even if I wanted to. It didn't matter whose name I wrote. Meg shrugged. It should be that all the high-level forces on the Norland continent knew that the Night Elves were preparing to retreat to Chaos City. That's true. Irina nodded, and then looked at Meg speechlessly. Then, why am I still wearing this lousy hat? Isn't it to appear more professional? Meg helped her put on the veil hat before flagging down a horse-drawn carriage to the north of the city. They still had to take a look at the factory. Otherwise, the Night Elves wouldn't have a place to sleep when they arrived. Seems like that Miss Succubus was right. This place is indeed a little desolate. Meg couldn't help but raise his eyebrows as he looked at the huge factory standing in the wilderness. He didn't expect there to be such a desolate place in Chaos City. The place that wasn't covered by snow was filled with weeds. This place has been abandoned for 2 to 3 years. What are you guys doing here? The coachman asked, perplexed. From today onwards, it belongs to us. Meg smiled. He asked the coachman to go closer to the factory and asked him to wait outside for a while. He then brought Irina to open the big lock on the door, pushed open the dusty door, and walked in. The interior of the factory wasn't as bad as Meg had imagined. Although there was a thick layer of dust on the ground, there weren't too many miscellaneous items. There were a few holes in the roof, but the overall structure was still very well preserved. They only needed to do some repairs and didn't need to demolish and rebuild it completely. Chapter 1284. In this factory, other than the 5 large 2-story workshops, there were 2 staff dormitories and a large empty space at the back. If they built another 2 staff dormitories, they would be able to satisfy the needs of the Night Elves. Not bad. Much better than the catacombs. Irina walked around the factory and nodded in satisfaction. All right, I'll get some craftsmen to repair it later. Meg was also quite satisfied. He was originally worried that the noise from machines would disturb the residents, but from the looks of it, there was no need to worry about this at all with the location of this factory. As for recruitment, they brought their own staff, so there was no need to worry about this problem. But what do you plan to let them do? Irina looked around and asked Meg. Why don't they do textiles? This factory is just right. Textiles? Irina frowned slightly. You'll know when the time comes. Meg said with a smile and looked at the factory again. Let's go. Otherwise, we won't be able to make it in time for the lunch service. Right? I'm interviewing new staff at noon. Do you want to participate? Interview? It's to test if those who signed up are suitable to be the restaurant staff. Sounds quite interesting. I'm the restaurant's lady boss, so I should participate, right? Waitress recruitment. Interview this afternoon. The list is as follows. The customers queuing at noon noticed the notice posted at the restaurant's entrance. There were 2 long lists of names written on it. Great, I'm on the list. Oh my God, I'm not on it. Uncle, isn't it too much for you to fake your gender? What do you know? My beauty is not something that ordinary people can appreciate. The customers looked at the list. Some were surprised, and some lamented. Yeah, Raina? It can't really be her, right? Shan looked at the familiar name on the list and could not help but feel surprised. She had planned to ask Raina to come over for lunch this afternoon, but she was unfortunately kept by the boss to rush with work. She probably did not even have time for lunch. Raina, I brought you a biscuit. Eat something first before you continue cooking. Shan returned to the company and placed the biscuit she bought from the street beside Raina, who was immersed in calculations, and said, Yes, thank you. Raina answered without raising her head. She quickly filled in the amount she had just calculated on the bill. It took her half an hour to calculate it. Shan sat down and asked curiously, By the way, I went to Mamie's for dinner just now and saw the interview list pasted on the door. There was someone with the same name as you on it. You didn't really sign up, did you? Whoosh. Raina's quill scratched the bill, but she didn't care. Instead, she looked up at Shan and said in surprise, Really? Can I really go for the interview? It really is you. Shan was also surprised, but she quickly nodded and said, I did see your name. The announcement said that the interview will start this afternoon. It's 1:30 now, so it should have started already. No, I have to go for the interview. Raina stood up and walked towards the door. But Raina, didn't the boss just ask you to give her the bill today? Shan looked at the thick ledger beside Raina's hand and reminded her worriedly. Raina's footsteps suddenly froze. She looked back at the ledger and remembered the boss's warning. If she didn't complete the task today, she would be fired. Her eyes were full of confusion. She didn't have much confidence in her success in the interview. Compared to the beautiful ladies at Mamie's, she looked a little shabby. If she didn't succeed in the interview, she would be fired from her current job. Then she wouldn't have the money to buy medicine for her mother. Thinking of this, Raina suddenly lost the courage to take another step forward. Shan looked at Raina with some pity in her eyes. Her family had shares in this company. She came to work because she was bored at home. The boss usually treated her well, but Raina was oppressed. She also knew that Raina loved cooking. If she could work at Mamie's, she would definitely live a happier life. Raina, give me half of the ledger. We'll try to finish it before the end of the day. Then you can go for the interview. Maybe you can make it in time, Shan said to Raina. This? Raina looked at Shan with a hint of hesitation. Although I don't want you to leave, if you become an employee at Mamie's, it will be a wonderful thing. Maybe you can even give me an extra helping of tofu pudding. Shan got up and took half of Raina's ledger. Then she returned to her seat and sat down. Let's start. We can do it. Thank you, Shan. Raina's eyes reddened. She quickly returned to her seat and picked up the quill again. After the lunch service ended, Meg began the first official interview for Mamie's recruitment after a short break. The interviewers for this interview were very luxurious. There was the #1 knight of the Norland continent, Alex, the former elven princess and leader of the Night Elves, Irina, Frost Dragon princesses Elizabeth and Yabamia, Moon Nation's princess, Barbara, Lantis princess, Gina, Fog Tribe's princess, Connie crossed out, Countess Bartoli's wife, Camilla, also crossed out, and so on. Such a lineup was actually just to recruit 1 or 2 new employees for the restaurant. A few tables were arranged in an arc. There was a chair in the middle of the arc. That was the interviewee's seat. Meanwhile, there were all kinds of props on a shelf at the side. Those were props to test the interviewee's ability. Ability was what Meg valued the most. Meg, who was sitting in the middle, looked at the princesses around him. He didn't know why they were all princesses. Could it be that he was attracted to princesses? Irina sat next to Meg and was also near the center. Although the ladies didn't understand why Princess Irina was suddenly so interested in the restaurant's recruitment, her status and ability were there. After all, there didn't seem to be anything wrong with her sitting in the middle. Meanwhile, the ladies were all curious. It was their first time interviewing an interviewee. Can I recruit a big sister that I like? Connie asked eagerly. No, you can't. Meg glanced at Connie and said calmly. Birds of a feather flocked together. If he recruited another dimwit, he would be worried about whether the restaurant could continue to operate. Sigh, Newbies have no human rights," Connie said softly as she slumped on the table dejectedly. "It's almost time. Let the first interviewee in." Meg glanced at the time and picked up the information on the table. The first interviewee was called Hannah, a young succubus. Chapter 1285. The ladies who came for the interview at noon had already formed a long line at the restaurant's entrance. There were a total of 50 people on the interview list, and they would be interviewed according to the order of their names on the list. Most of the ladies had exquisite makeup on as they stood there nervously. There were many noble ladies who were dressed extravagantly, which made many passers-by click their tongues in amazement. There was only one restaurant in Chaos City where noble ladies were lining up to be waitresses, and that was Mamie's. First interviewee, Miss Hannah. "Please come in," Anna read out as she walked to the door with the name list. A tall succubus lady walked out from the line and unbuttoned her coat as she walked. When she reached the restaurant's entrance, she took off the coat that was wrapped around her and only wore a black, tight-fitting suit that showed off her voluptuous figure perfectly. "Wow, that figure is so good. I'm so jealous. Oof, she just wants to sell her body. Scheming bitch. Wrap my tummy tightly." The ladies waiting for the interview all looked at Hannah and began to whisper among themselves. "Little cutie, can you help me hold it?" The succubus Hannah asked Anna with a smile. "All right." Anna reached out and hugged that huge dress, which almost drowned her whole body. "Thank you," Hannah said with a smile. She took a deep breath and then pushed open the door confidently and walked in. Ding! The bell rang, and Meg and the rest all looked up at the door. A succubus in a black, tight-fitting suit walked in. Her wavy red hair was wild, and her curvy figure was perfectly displayed in the black, tight-fitting suit. Her pair of phoenix eyes stared at Meg, who was sitting in the middle, and threw him a flirtatious glance. Sexy. That was everyone's first impression of this succubus lady. Even if she did nothing and just stood there, she still had a magical charm that made people want to take a second look at her. Of course, other than the fact that she was indeed beautiful and sexy as a succubus, they had the gift of seduction. Meg frowned slightly as he looked at that succubus lady who was looking at him with sparkling eyes. She had obviously used her gift of seduction on him, and that made him a little unhappy. Succubi were natural salespeople. As long as they could unleash their charm freely, they could easily defeat 99% of the ordinary people in this industry. However, Mamie's didn't need salespeople, and now it didn't need a waitress who could seduce the boss. Did he have the guts to do something? No. Irina, on the other hand, was looking at Mag and that succubus with a smile. This little succubus was quite daring to seduce her man in front of her. "Oh, it's so big." Phyllis looked at Hannah and then lowered her head to look at herself, feeling a little depressed. Hannah's seduction. Okay. Hannah looked at Meg's bright eyes, and a hint of surprise appeared in her eyes. Mr. Mack didn't respond to her charm at all. Even though she was only a third-tier succubus, even a seventh-tier knight would be tempted by her seduction spell, but it didn't work on Mag. Although she was surprised, Hannah still calmly sat down on the chair. Looking at the people in the semicircle facing her from all directions, she still felt a little nervous. When did the interview become like this? Shouldn't I just talk to the boss alone? Hannah muttered in her heart. She liked to eat the food at Mamie's, but her current job only allowed her to eat at Mamie's twice a week, and she couldn't eat expensive food. This was too cruel for a succubus who liked to eat. So when she saw the restaurant's recruitment notice, she immediately signed up. She was full of confidence that she could be hired. Although she wasn't familiar with the food and beverage industry, she knew men like the back of her hand. She was born to charm men. Coincidentally, the boss of Mamie's was a man, and a bachelor at that. If possible, she wouldn't mind becoming the lady boss of Mamie's. In that case, she should be able to eat a second helping of tofu pudding, right? Although she was facing beautiful girls, Hannah quickly re-established her confidence. Beauty alone might not be able to win over men. Otherwise, Mamie's would have had a lady boss long ago. Obviously, these beautiful girls were a little uneasy. "Miss Hannah, can you introduce yourself first?" Meg looked at Hannah and said, the information in the information was very limited, and he didn't want to brush off an interviewee directly based on the first impression. Hannah looked at Meg and smiled. Hello, boss. I'm Hannah, 20 years old this year. I'm a level 3 succubus. I've been in the construction material sales industry for 3 years. I'm a sales champion in this industry. Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt. Meg raised his hand to signal Hannah to stop, and then said, because there are more people interviewing today, you can skip the specific details of your previous work and your growth history as much as possible. Just talk about your specialty and what you can do in our restaurant. In this restaurant, you're qualified for any job. Hannah, who was interrupted, pondered for a while, then smiled at Meg and said, I think I'm qualified for the job of receiving customers. This is also an important part of my current job. Also, if boss needs to do anything in your daily life, you can let me do it. If there's something, Hannah will do it. If there's nothing, Hannah will do it. If there's nothing, Hannah will do it. If there's nothing, Hannah will do it. Hannah gave Meg a knowing look. Meg looked down, indicating that he didn't know anything. The girls nodded slightly. Looking at Hannah, they all felt that she could do the task of receiving customers well. The customers would probably like such an employee. If there's nothing, Hannah, she's really a model of a good employee. Irina curled her lips and said with slight mockery, Comrade, your idea is very dangerous. Hannah's expression stiffened, and she looked at Irina. This was an extremely beautiful elf. Her noble temperament made her feel a little ashamed, and she subconsciously restrained her charm. But who was this beautiful elf? I didn't see her when I was eating in the restaurant. Was she a new waitress? Or was she the boss's wife who had never shown up? I didn't mean that. I just feel that I can take care of the boss's life while doing a good job in the restaurant. I think this is what I should do as a restaurant employee. Chapter 1286. Actually, you're here to apply for the lady boss position, right? Irina looked at Hannah with a smile. Meg glanced at Irina. He felt that there was a knife hidden in that smile. Hannah choked. Although that was indeed what she was thinking, she didn't expect Mag to see through her. She glanced at Mag and meekly said, I just want to find a job that I like. All right, Miss Hannah, we have understood your situation. We will consider whether to hire you. The specific notice will be posted tomorrow afternoon. You can pay attention to it. Meg smiled. In order to ensure the safety of the succubus, he felt that it was better to end this interview as soon as possible. All right. Hannah got up and left. Under that elf's gaze, she felt that she had been completely seen through. It was a terrible feeling. When Hannah left the restaurant, the cold wind blew, and she couldn't help but shiver. Sister, your clothes. Anna handed the clothes she was holding to Hannah. Thank you. Hannah took the clothes and put them on. A confident smile appeared on her face again. She swayed her beautiful waist and left as if she had been successfully hired. Next, Anna took out the name list and called for the next interviewee. Hey, Uncle, your powder isn't even evenly applied. You didn't shave your beard clean, and a corner of your mantle is showing. Don't you think it's a bit too much to dress up like this to deceive people? Mag couldn't help grumbling as he looked at the cross-dresser, who had a thick layer of white powder on his face and 2 exaggerated false eyelashes, and was speaking in a hoarse falsetto while pinching his throat. He glanced at Shirley, who was standing at the side. This was the perfect example of a cross-dresser. It was enough to pass off as the real deal. Did you glue your eyelashes with donkey hair? Irina asked curiously. You're bullying me. Boo-hoo. The uncle covered his face and ran away. Next, Meg said calmly, Are you sure you didn't fill in the wrong information? Meg glanced at the information that stated her height was 165 centimeters and weight was 85 centimeters. Then he looked at the fat girl who was sitting on the chair like a little meat bun and asked with uncertainty. Maybe one of the weights overlapped with the grid. You didn't look carefully. The girl said weakly. Mag took a closer look, and indeed, he could vaguely see a vertical handwriting on the weight column. It was deliberate. He couldn't help but chuckle. You're such a clever little brat. Although I don't look that slender, I'm only 18 years old. I'm at the age where I'm like a flower, blooming with youth and beauty. Look, don't I look like a flower? The fat girl used her two chubby hands to support her chin and shook her head left and right. Is it meaty? Irina asked. The girl's expression suddenly froze. Although it was meaty and cute, but it was still too square. The restaurant suddenly quieted down, and all the women turned their faces away, trying hard not to laugh. The boss and Princess Irina's comments were so sharp that they couldn't get a word in edgewise. Miss, Mamie's work intensity is very high. It might not be suitable for you right now. Meg also tried to hold back his laughter. Being fat wasn't a big problem, but Meg didn't like the fact that she was deliberately misleading the information. Moreover, from the way she was panting after taking a few steps, it was obvious that her physical fitness couldn't keep up with the intensity of work in the restaurant. Therefore, her name was removed from the list. Next, Vanessa. Meg looked at the familiar name and was slightly surprised. Wasn't this Princess Vanessa's fake name? Why did she sign up? This list was selected by Anna according to his requirements. He was too busy yesterday and didn't pay attention to it, so he didn't notice that Princess Vanessa had also signed up. Mamie's was full of princesses now, but most of them were princesses who had fallen on hard times and were kindly taken in by him. However, this princess of the Roth Empire was different. This princess was deeply doted on by the king. If he knew that Vanessa was working as a waitress at Mamie's, he would probably investigate the restaurant thoroughly. Meg was still thinking about it when the restaurant's door was pushed open and Vanessa walked in. The door closed slowly, and Laura's anxious face was also shut out. Hello, I am Vanessa. Vanessa lifted the hem of her dress elegantly and bowed slightly. Her hand, which was grabbing the hem of her dress, was a little pale because she was using too much force. She had only read about interviews in books and had never thought that she would face one day. It was as if there were countless deer running around in her heart, and she was extremely nervous. She looked up, and her gaze fell on Irina. She was slightly taken aback, and after blinking to make sure that she wasn't seeing things, she covered her mouth and exclaimed, "Big sister Irina, isn't this little Sasha? Why are you here?" Irina looked at Vanessa with a hint of surprise. This little girl used to come and play with her every time she went to Rodeo, and she had watched her grow up. She didn't expect to meet her in Chaos City. Vanessa was a little hesitant. She didn't want to expose her identity, but she didn't know how to lie. Lie was really not her forte. Irina seemed to have seen through Vanessa's thoughts and waved a hand casually as she said, "It's all right. It's not shameful to be kicked out because of your ugliness." Vanessa nodded, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Only big sister Irina could come up with such a reason. However, when she saw Irina sitting next to Mag, she couldn't help but curiously ask, "Then, why are you here, big sister Irina?" "I'm here to eat, and also to join in the fun," Irina replied casually. "I see." Vanessa nodded with an enlightened expression. She didn't suspect anything at all. "You believe her just like that?" Meg raised an eyebrow. He was still thinking about how to explain Irina's presence here. Miss Vanessa, are you here to apply for a waitress position?" Meg picked up the information and skimmed through it. Vanessa's qualifications did meet all the requirements that Meg had previously mentioned, so he had nothing to say about her being chosen by Anna. However, he didn't dare to keep her if she dared to enter the restaurant. "Yes, Mr. Mack. I like Mamie's, and I also want to become a member of Mamie's. I think it will be a very interesting experience." Vanessa nodded seriously. Her eyes were sparkling. She had come for the interview without telling Uncle Abraham today. "This," Mag murmured as he looked at Vanessa's sparkling eyes. He didn't know what reason he should use to reject this princess who was so passionate about her work. "Carry this stack of plates and walk around the restaurant 10 times. Irina pointed at a stack of plates on the table next to them. There were about 15 plates on the table, and there were bowls and plates of all kinds. It was more in line with the number of plates that a table could take in during business hours. "Okay." Vanessa stepped forward excitedly and reached out to pick up the plate. "It's so heavy." Although the tray was lifted up, the heaviness made Vanessa feel as if her arm was about to be torn off. She forced herself to walk forward, and every step was extremely difficult. She had only taken about 10 steps when she lost her balance, and the stacked plates fell to the ground with a crash. No pop-up window. Chapter 12:87. With a series of clattering sounds, the plates and bowls shattered all over the floor. Vanessa hugged the last big plate on the tray in a flurry. She looked at the broken pieces of porcelain on the floor and swallowed her saliva. She looked back at everyone and said apologetically, "I'll pay for this." Meg shook his head and looked at Vanessa. "That's fine, but plates of this weight will need to be moved about 100 times a day. There can't be any mistakes. Do you think you can do it? 100 times?" Vanessa was speechless. She felt like her arms were about to break after taking a few steps with such heavy plates. Her arms were still sore and weak. If she had to carry so many plates to and fro in the restaurant 100 times, she wouldn't be able to do it even if she was killed. "I definitely can't do it." Vanessa shook her head and then looked at Yabamiya and the rest with admiration. These ladies were so impressive. Usually, they looked so relaxed at work and could even look beautiful. She didn't expect the things they were doing to be so tough. "It's fine. It's good to realize your own shortcomings. Big sister will treat you to hot pot tonight." Irina looked at Vanessa with a smile. "Really?" Vanessa's eyes lit up, and she immediately nodded happily. Okay. Vanessa and Irina agreed to eat hot pot together and then left happily. Meg heaved a sigh of relief and looked at Irina with admiration. Her move of retreating in the face of difficulties was really brilliant. The next few interviewees were more average. There were a few girls who had experience working in restaurants. Meg added a star. It was easier for those with experience to get the hang of the job. They also had expectations of the work intensity and wouldn't leave after a few days of hard work. However, Meg didn't hire them directly. Instead, he told them to look at the announcement tomorrow so that they wouldn't miss out on more suitable candidates. The next interviewee is Raina. Raina didn't come? Uncle Meg, the interviewee Raina, didn't come for the interview. Anna walked in and looked at Meg. "Okay, then let's skip to the next one." Meg nodded and put Raina's information aside. She was the first interviewee to give up on her own accord today. "Okay," Anna responded and went out to call the next interviewee. Still no one was hired directly? It's so strict. There were a few young ladies who weren't hired, even though they were so pretty. "I'm a little scared." Did Mr. Mack do something to them? The interviewees were the interviewees of the interviewees. Before the new interviewee arrived, Yabamiya yawned and asked Mag, "Boss, the interviews are almost over. Don't you have anyone in mind yet?" "Of the interview, but let's see all the interviewees first. So far, I don't think there's anyone who can get the job." Meg shook his head with a smile. Maybe he was being too demanding, but the waitresses were an important part of the restaurant. It was only right to be serious. The interview continued. Meg and Irina still maintained a serious attitude. "Uncle Meg, we've interviewed all the interviewees on the list," Anna said as she walked in. "Okay, thank you for your hard work this afternoon." Meg folded the information neatly into 2 stacks. He had to think carefully about which one to choose from among the few girls who were on his short list. Phyllis and Shirley's return alleviated the lack of waitresses in the restaurant. One more waitress would be enough. If there were more, it would seem like there were people standing everywhere. Ding-ling. Just then, the bell rang outside the door. Everyone looked up in surprise. Wasn't the interview over? Anna tiptoed and pushed open the door. A girl was standing at the door, sweating profusely. She held the door with one hand and panted heavily. I'm Raina. May I know if has the interview ended?" "Yes, it just ended." Mag nodded as he looked at this thin and frail maiden. She had a head of slightly curly flaxen hair and a delicate face. It seemed like she had run all the way here. The name Raina sounded familiar. He lowered his head and looked at the information he had singled out. It was the interviewee who didn't come. Raina stood up straight and tried to calm her breathing. She looked at Meg sincerely and said, Can you give me a chance?" Meg looked at Raina and nodded slightly. "You're the 21st interviewee. The interview time has passed, but if your reason for being late is good enough, I don't mind giving you a chance to interview. I was working just now. Although it's a job that doesn't pay much and is very tedious, I can't lose that job before I'm sure I can become an employee of Mamie's. It's related to the survival of my mother in my life. With the help of my colleagues, I finished my work in advance and ran all the way to the restaurant. I'm very sorry for missing the interview time, Raina said apologetically. She lowered her eyes and looked depressed. Although she and Shanshan had worked very hard, there were too many accounts. They still missed the interview time. It seemed like she still didn't have the chance to become an employee of Mamie's. Everyone in the restaurant looked at Meg. This girl didn't have it easy. If only she could be given another chance. A very wise choice. Come on, Miss Raina. Let's start your interview today, Meg said with a smile. Of the 80 or so interviewees who came for the interview today, most of them wouldn't be hired. If they lost their original jobs because of an unknown interview, it wouldn't be a wise choice. Raina looked up at Meg in surprise. She couldn't believe her ears. Meg picked up Raina's information and looked at her. We'll be preparing for the evening business soon, so we don't have much time to talk. Miss Raina, please show us why we chose you to join Mamie's. Raina took a deep breath and walked a few steps forward to the chair. However, she didn't sit down. She looked at Meg and said, "Can I enter your kitchen?" "Why?" Meg asked. His kitchen wasn't open to strangers. "Although I haven't eaten hot pot at Mamie's, I smelled the aroma of the red soup 2 nights ago. I can tell which spices you used," Raina said confidently. Chapter 1288. There's such a thing? Meg looked at Raina in surprise. She was confident that she could tell which spices Meg used just by smelling it a few times in the evening 2 days ago. Could it be that this girl had the legendary god's nose? Do you have a dog's nose? Irina was also surprised. After eating the hot pot yesterday, she couldn't tell anything apart from the few spices she could see. Anyway, it was delicious. Everyone in the restaurant also looked at Raina curiously. How many spices did the boss put in the hot pot? Even if they had eaten it a few times, they still couldn't tell. There may be some deviation, but I believe in my nose. Raina nodded firmly. Okay, follow me. Meg didn't beat around the bush. He immediately got up and walked to the kitchen. Raina quickly caught up with him. On the way to the kitchen, she kept taking deep breaths to adjust her heartbeat. This was her only chance. If she didn't perform well, she might have to stay in that terrible place for the rest of her life. Everyone also followed her to the kitchen. This test was much more interesting than carrying plates and mopping the floor. If Raina really succeeded, it would be amazing. Raina subconsciously stopped at the entrance of the kitchen. Looking at the bright and transparent kitchen, her eyes suddenly lit up. There was a clear division of labor, a washing table, a cutting table, and a stove. All kinds of knives and pots hung on the wall were all shining with a bright metallic luster. She almost couldn't believe that a kitchen could be like this. It was completely beyond her imagination. In her kitchen, there was only a hanging pot and a small stove made of stones. Everything in front of her was like a dream. If she could cook here, Raina's heart beat violently. She couldn't imagine that kind of happiness. Meg looked back at Raina, who was standing at the entrance of the kitchen and looking at the kitchen bit by bit. Her eyes were shining with a devout light, as if she was worshiping a holy place. He showed some appreciation in his eyes and didn't rush to interrupt her. Raina's eyes looked around the kitchen and finally fell on Meg. When she found that he was looking at her, she suddenly realized that she was still in the interview. Her face suddenly showed a little panic. She quickly waved her hand and said, "Oh, sorry. I just couldn't control myself for the first time seeing such a high-end kitchen. It doesn't matter. These are the spices and spices I usually use. The spices and spices used in the red soup hot pot are all here. Now, it's your turn to perform." Meg opened the lids of the spices and spices one by one and then stood aside. There were all kinds of spices and spices and spices. He used a total of 15 kinds of spices and spices for the red soup hot pot. It was completely impossible, even for people who had eaten the hot pot, to accurately choose the spices he used. Otherwise, he would be too easy to imitate. Now Raina, who had only smelled the aroma, was trying to challenge his red soup hot pot recipe. He didn't think highly of it. What a complete set of spices. Raina took 2 steps forward and came to the front of the spices. She didn't flinch because of the excessive number of spices and spices. Instead, she looked at the spices with some surprise. She had never bought spices like pepper, which was more expensive than gold. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The fragrance of all kinds of spices made her smile contentedly. If she could have the right to control these spices, it would be great. Then I'll start. Raina didn't indulge in the fragrance for too long. She turned her head and said to Meg. Then she took a plate from the side and began to put her nose close to the spices and carefully sniffed the fragrance of the spices. Although there were many spices she hadn't seen before, the smell wouldn't lie. She only needed to find the same smell as the one she smelled that day. Then it would be the right choice. This one, and this one. Raina grabbed spices from the spices box and placed them on the plate. She wasn't fast, but she was very methodical. She sniffed row by row and occasionally paused to think for a while before choosing the spices she agreed with and placing them on the plate. Can she succeed? Anna stood on her tiptoes and looked in through the window. She muttered curiously. Maybe. Shirley lifted Anna up so that she could easily see the scene in the kitchen. Pepper, dried chili, star anise, cinnamon. Meg's eyes became brighter and brighter. So far, all the spices Raina had chosen were correct. The spices boxes were placed in a random order, so it was impossible for her to guess randomly. About 10 minutes later, Raina gently placed the plate on the stove and took 2 steps back. She looked at Meg nervously and said, "There are 2 spices that I'm not very sure about. Because the smell is weaker, and it might be covered by the smell of other spices, I didn't choose them." "Did you choose the right one?" Irina asked curiously. Everyone also looked at Meg curiously. This test was the most exciting one of the day. Choosing spices and seasonings based on smell was practically a hellish level of difficulty. The spicy hot pot has a strong flavor, so salt is essential. An appropriate amount of rock sugar can make the soup mellow and sweet and alleviate the spiciness. Everything else is correct. Meg scooped a piece of rock sugar and a spoonful of salt onto the plate. Then, he gave Raina a thumbs up and said seriously, "You're a genius. Isn't this too awesome?" Yabamiya looked at Raina in amazement. Even now, she still couldn't learn how to make rujiamo. "That's amazing. You got almost everything right." Phyllis also looked at Raina in amazement. When she first learned how to make the sauce for roast beef kebabs, it had taken her a long time to succeed. "Why do they all smell the same to me?" Irina leaned forward and took a sniff. She looked at Raina's nose with a puzzled expression. Maybe her nose was fake. Everyone was amazed by Raina's performance. There were so many spices, and even if they were told the names, they might not be able to choose them correctly, let alone accurately choose them after smelling the soup pot once. I was just a little lucky," Raina said softly as she lowered her head shyly from everyone's compliments. "Actually, I'm more curious about one thing. Since you can decipher my recipe based on smell, why don't you open your own hot pot restaurant? Even if you have 1 or 2 fewer spices, your business won't be too bad if the price is slightly more affordable." Meg looked into Raina's eyes and asked seriously. Raina shook her head with a determined gaze and said, "This is a delicacy that you created. It's too unfair for you to imitate it just because you know the recipe. I don't think that's what a chef should do. Actually, I don't care if others imitate it." Meg smiled and extended his hand to Raina. "But I like your answer. If you're willing, Miss Raina, welcome to Mamie's. No pop-up window." Chapter 1289. Raina looked at Meg's outstretched hand and was stunned for a while. Then, she looked at Meg in disbelief and said, "You're saying that I've been hired?" "Yes, I'm very surprised by your professionalism." Meg nodded with a smile. "If you're willing, we can sign a probationary contract today. Your salary during the probationary period will be 3,500 copper coins. After the 1-month probationary period, you will automatically become an official employee. Your salary will be determined according to your official job, but it won't be lower than the probationary period salary. Also, the restaurant will provide you with 3 meals and accommodation." Raina covered her gaping mouth with her hand. She still looked at Meg in disbelief. Was she really going to become an employee of Mamie's? She had only smelled some spices. Moreover, a probationary salary of 3,500 copper coins was already 1,000 copper coins higher than her current job. If her salary was even higher after she became an official employee, she would be able to buy better medicine for her mother. Raina, have you decided? Meg asked. I'm willing. Raina quickly nodded and reached out to hold Meg's hand. There were tears in her eyes. She could finally get rid of that terrible job and give her mother better conditions. Welcome to Mamie's big family, Meg said with a smile. Then, he let go of Raina's hand like a gentleman. Hello, Raina. I'm Mia. Yabamia went up to greet her. Hello, I'm Gina. Gina could already introduce herself fluently in the common language. Everyone went up to greet Raina and introduce themselves while they were at it. No one had any objections to Meg choosing Raina as his new employee. She had perfectly distinguished all the spices and seasonings used in the hot pot just by smelling. Everyone was deeply impressed by that. Can you tell me why you chose me? Raina asked Meg curiously when they were signing the contract. Your talent in distinguishing fragrances amazed me, but your character is what truly moved me. Meg looked at Raina and said with a smile, if your talent in cooking is as good, I might have found a good sous chef. I don't think I can do it, Raina said with some uncertainty. Although she often imitated the delicacies of some restaurants, she only made them for her mother and a few good friends. She had never thought that the food she made could be eaten by customers, let alone in a high-end restaurant like Mamie's. Whether it works or not, we'll only know after we try. Meg smiled and shook his head. Seeing that Raina had already signed a contract, he looked at the time and asked, when will you be able to hand over your last job? I'll resign today and come to work in the restaurant tomorrow, Raina said at once. Okay, then leave your clothes size. I'll prepare work clothes for you. Report to the restaurant tomorrow morning before 7:30. Meg nodded. Okay. Raina nodded and wrote down her clothes size on the paper. Then she said goodbye and left. That's great. I've finally joined Mamie's. Raina opened the restaurant door and jumped out. She clenched her fists and shouted happily. Then, she raised her head and her gaze met the 2 rows of customers who were staring at her. Raina's expression suddenly froze and her face quickly turned red. She slowly closed her legs and smiled awkwardly but politely at the crowd. Then she immediately lowered her head and turned around to leave. My God, why are there so many people? This is so embarrassing. Raina roared in her heart. So this is the new waitress at Mamie's? She looks quite energetic. Yes, and she's quite cute. I'm so envious of this sister joining the freeloading group. The customers looked at Raina's back and discussed curiously. The news of Mamie's hiring had attracted a lot of attention in the past 2 days. After all, the waitresses in the restaurant were all as beautiful as flowers. What kind of waitress would join them became the focus of everyone's curiosity. In the crowd, Constantine, who was wearing a brand new robe, nervously tidied his clothes and touched his neatly oiled hair. He picked up the bouquet of flowers in his hand and put it down again. He looked back at Harrison, who was behind him, and said, Brother, can you help me take a look and see if my clothes and hair are messy? Harrison looked Constantine up and down and shook his head. Pretty good. There's nothing wrong with him. Thanks. Constantine heaved a sigh of relief. A smile appeared on his face again, and he was about to turn around. No, I say, brother, you're dressed so neatly for a meal, and you even brought a bouquet of flowers. Don't tell me you're going to confess to Mr. Mack? Harrison asked with a gossipy look. Mr. Mack is into this? George, who was next to him, came over curiously. The surrounding customers all looked at Constantine curiously when they heard that. This young man was quite handsome. Why did he have such a fetish? Nonsense. I like women. How could I like men? Constantine said seriously. He held the bouquet and looked in the direction of Mamie's with anticipation. Today, I'm going to confess my feelings to that beautiful lady. This time, I don't want to miss it again. Which lady is it? Which beautiful waitress in the restaurant is so unlucky that you've taken a fancy to her? Harrison was even more curious. The customers also looked at Constantine curiously. Confessing to a waitress in a restaurant was something that had never happened at Mamie's before. This kind of gossip was the best material to talk about. You'll know in a while. Constantine didn't intend to reveal anything. He straightened his clothes, stood up straighter, and used deep breaths to regulate his heartbeat. Harrison shrugged in boredom. He could only wait for the restaurant to open. Ding! The restaurant's door opened outwards. Meg, who was wearing a chef's uniform, was standing at the entrance, as usual. He welcomed everyone with a smile. Constantine's gaze quickly landed on Shirley in the restaurant, and his eyes moistened instantly. This was the lady that he had been thinking about day and night. "You're finally here in front of me again." The customers greeted Meg and filed in. Constantine's footsteps were a little exaggerated as he walked forward with the crowd. He directly passed by Meg and stood in front of Shirley. He swallowed nervously and said, "Miss Shirley, do you still remember me?" Shirley glanced at Constantine and calmly said, "No." Constantine's enthusiasm and bellyful of things that he wanted to say were suddenly doused with a basin of ice water. Chapter 1290. Meg looked at Constantine, who was dressed neatly with a bouquet of flowers in his hand, and suddenly pitied this infatuated man who came to ask about Shirley every day. What was love? It was so important that people would die for it. However, Meg wasn't in a position to say anything about this. After all, although Shirley was a cross-dresser, he had never purposely acted like a woman. His sexual orientation and who he liked were none of Meg's business. The first tragedy before the new year. Harrison sighed as he walked past Constantine. The gossipy crowd also looked at Constantine with pity. This love that had not even sprouted was mercilessly killed just like that. It was really sad. Constantine quickly put away his disappointment and said with a smile, "It's okay. Let me introduce myself again. I am not interested." Shirley turned around coldly and walked to the kitchen. She was about to start her work. Constantine looked at Shirley's back. His mouth was open for a long time before he slowly closed it. His shoulders drooped in disappointment. Anna looked at Constantine pitifully. This uncle came to ask about sister Shirley every day. He must really like her, but she did not seem to be interested in him. "That uncle looks like a dog," Amy said softly beside Anna as she licked her ice cream. "What dog?" Anna asked, puzzled. Amy thought for a while and said, "A lone dog. It's okay. Since Miss Shirley is back, at least I still have a chance. Let's take it slow." Constantine's fighting spirit was quickly reignited. He smiled confidently, walked to his usual table, sat down, and began to order. "Shan, I succeeded," Raina called out excitedly when she returned to the company. She was still working when she saw Shan. "Succeeded?" Shan looked up in confusion. Seeing Raina's smiling face, she suddenly realized something and jumped up from her chair. She grabbed Raina's hand excitedly and said, "Raina, did you succeed in getting hired at Amy's?" Yes, I was hired." Raina nodded vigorously. "That's great." The two girls hugged each other and jumped excitedly in the office. "It's office hours. What's with the noise?" A gloomy voice sounded from the door. Shan and Raina were shocked and quickly separated. They looked at the middle-aged woman in a long black dress standing at the door with a panicked expression. Bang! The woman walked in and slammed a thick ledger on the table. She looked at Raina and said coldly, "Raina, look at your ledger. Didn't I tell you to write down the information and time of every income and expenditure? Take a look and see how many of them don't have the time written on them. Also, what are these messy labels? I'm paying you to work. If you can't even do such a small thing, then get the hell out of here." "Okay, boss. From tomorrow onwards, I won't be coming to the company. Please find someone else," Raina said with a relaxed expression. She waved at Shan and turned to walk out the door. "You?" The boss was stunned for a moment when she saw Raina turn and leave. She obviously didn't expect that this little clerk, who was usually submissive and never dared to go against her, would actually fire her without any hesitation. "All right, let me remind you. You should ask your dear brother and sister-in-law about the ledger. They might know more about where those expenses without the time and notes came from." Raina stopped and turned to look at the boss. She then turned and left. After leaving the company, Raina turned back and took a look at this place where she had stayed for 3 years. She turned and left without any reluctance. The moment she turned, she felt much more relaxed. Even the setting sun seemed to have become brighter. Even though her salary was deducted for half a month, the salary was just paid a few days ago. If she used it sparingly, she should be able to last until Mamie's next month. It was a salary of 3,500 yuan. When she received her salary next month, she could buy new clothes for her mother. After Connie carried the Buddha jumps over the wall and passed through 9 levels of the prison, she was finally surrounded by the prison guards. She was then brought to Lex. After the prison guards left, she went forward and asked, "Master, what are we learning today? You have learned a lot during this period of time. Tonight, you're going to kill a few people." Lex took the Buddha jumps over the wall, opened the lid, and took a deep sniff. She revealed a satisfied smile and said casually, "Killing people." Connie was slightly shocked. She flinched a little and said, "I don't know how to do that. What you learned from me was killing people. If you don't know how to kill people, are you going to learn how to kill chickens?" Lex took a sip of the soup and said with a smile. Connie shrugged and said innocently, "But I haven't even killed a chicken before. Those fellows who chased after you previously have their eyes on Mamie's. If you don't kill them, they will find you sooner or later. Then they will kill you or bring you back to kill you. What's the difference? It's a faster death or a slower death. Those fellows killed my father and my clansmen. I want to kill them for revenge." Connie clenched her fists and looked at Lex. She said, "Master, please help me kill them." Clang. Lex took out a short dagger from somewhere and threw it on the table. The address is at the second courtyard of the 3rd lane on the western road in the north of the city. There are a total of 5 orcs, and their abilities are between grade 6 and grade 7. If you are fast enough, you can slit their necks before they wake up. If you're not fast enough, any one of them can easily kill you. "You really want me to go?" Connie was a little anxious. "Did you become my disciple because you wanted me to help you take revenge?" Lex put down the spoon and asked while looking into Connie's eyes. Connie was slightly taken aback. She looked into Lex's eyes and shook her head. She picked up the dagger and held it tightly in her hand. She turned around and walked to the door. Then she stopped and looked back at Lex. She asked, "Master, how do I get to the western road in the north of the city? Where do I start counting from for the 3rd lane? Does the second courtyard refer to the one on the left or the one on the right?" PFFF. Rex, who was drinking his soup, spat it out. He looked at his soup with some heartache, and then looked at Connie with a look of exasperation. "Can't you use your brain?" Connie pouted. "What can I do? I am in despair too. Wait here. I will bring you there in a while." Lex sighed with a headache. In order to prevent Connie from being unable to find the assassination target, he could only take on the role of a driver for the time being. Chapter 1291. "I am an emotionless killer," Rex said coldly as he flung his black windbreaker after walking out of the Batai prison. "I am a killer with no sense of direction," Connie said weakly as he put on the helmet. Rex, who was walking in front, staggered and almost fell. He turned around and knocked Connie's helmet with a chestnut. He said speechlessly, "Can you not wear your turtle shell when you're killing people?" Connie nodded. "Master, didn't you say that killers have to remain mysterious?" Connie said aggrievedly as he pulled up his goggles. "Wouldn't it be very mysterious if you killed everyone who saw you?" Rex pursed his lips. "Indeed, rotten wood could not be carved. Isn't that too cruel?" Connie was a little hesitant. "Remember, killers cannot be merciful. Once you are merciful, the person who will die might be you," Rex said seriously as he looked into Connie's eyes. Rex looked into Connie's eyes and said seriously. Then he took off Connie's helmet and threw it onto the bicycle 50 meters away. It fell into the basket of the bicycle with a clang. "Phew! Seriously, even if I don't wear it when I'm killing people, I can still keep myself warm on the road." Connie mumbled as he shuddered. Rex's eyelids twitched. What kind of person was this? He had taken in a disciple, and he had to teach her even if he had to hold back his tears. He coldly said, "Let's go." "Oh." Connie quickly followed behind. 2 black shadows flashed through the night sky of Chaos City like cats, silently flying over one roof after another as they made their way to the north of the city. "Are you sure? Princess Connie is really hiding in that restaurant?" In a room lit by a yellow oil lamp, 5 orcs were gathered around a wooden table, whispering to each other. Although she always wears a strange shell on her head when she goes in and out, the bracelet on her hand was given to her by the chief. It has an opal embedded in it. I happened to see it the day before yesterday and followed her for 2 days. Be it her figure or the bracelet, I can basically confirm that she is Princess Connie, a skinny orc said with a nod. Oomph. I didn't expect the princess of the Fok tribe to work as a service staff member in a restaurant. We've had such a hard time looking for her. Since we've already found her, we'll go and confirm it again tomorrow morning. Then, we'll take action at night to capture her. The chief has promised us a lot of benefits. When we return, we'll be big shots in the tribe. The orcs all laughed proudly. They had done a great service in this rebellion. As long as they could capture Princess Connie, they would enjoy endless women and money for the rest of their lives. They could even become the new chief's right-hand men. After making plans for tomorrow's operation, one of the orcs stayed behind to keep watch, while the rest of the orcs went to sleep separately to recuperate and prepare for tomorrow's capture. This is the place. Make sure you're clean. I'll wait for you for 10 minutes, Lex said coldly as 2 voices rang out at the entrance of the alley. All right. Connie took a deep breath, gripped her dagger tightly, and rushed to the second yard. It's that way. A hand clasped Lex's shoulder, and Lex helplessly pointed at the courtyard opposite her. How awkward would it be to kill the wrong person? Master, why didn't you say so earlier? Connie rolled her eyes at Rexha, then turned and charged towards another courtyard. She didn't make the slightest sound as her toes tapped against the wall. She arched her body and silently landed in the courtyard. How can you blame me for this? Rexha looked helpless. After landing in the yard lightly, Connie quickly approached the 3 rooms in the yard like a black cat. She stuck close to the rooms silently, and her standing cat ears trembled slightly as she listened to the slight movements in the rooms. There were people in all 3 rooms. 2 people were sleeping on the left and right sides, and 1 was sleeping in the middle. Judging from their breathing, they were all in a deep sleep. This was the best opportunity to hunt. Just as Connie was about to use her dagger to pry open the door bolt and enter the room, a light snoring sound came from the side. There's someone else? Connie, who was already nervous, trembled and almost dropped her dagger. She took a few deep breaths to adjust her emotions and reached out to hold onto the roof to swing to the other side of the room. She saw an orc hugging a mace and sleeping soundly against the wall. This is the fellow who killed my younger brother. Connie gripped her dagger tightly, and her face turned pale. She recalled the day when the rebel army invaded the palace and massacred everyone. This fellow was by Gary's side, and he used that mace to kill her younger brother. Revenge. I want revenge. There was only one thought left in Connie's mind. She let go of her hand and fell from the roof. She drew her dagger out of the sheath silently and pierced the heart of the orc who was still sleeping soundly precisely as she usually did. Ugh! That orc woke up with a start and stared at Connie, who was standing in front of him, with eyes wide open in disbelief. However, before he could make a sound, the dagger that was pulled out from his heart had already pierced into his mouth, and the back of his head was pierced. Connie pressed down on that orc's head and pulled out the dagger slowly. She let him lean against the wall and slowly fall to the ground. She didn't make a sound the entire time. Connie took 2 steps back and looked at that orc lying in a pool of blood. Her breathing became heavier, and her hand that was holding the dagger was trembling. Blood splattered all over her body and face, and the strong smell of blood made her feel a little nauseous. However, there was a glimmer in her eyes. She killed this bastard and took revenge for her younger brother. When she escaped from the Twilight Forest alone, she felt that she would never be able to take revenge in this lifetime. How could she, who had been weak since she was young, be a match for Gary and his subordinates? However, she had killed this opponent whom she once thought was undefeatable. This feeling was simply too amazing to her. After calming herself down, her gaze became calm again. She looked at the 3 rooms and hesitated for a moment before walking to the room on the far right. The orc sleeping in a room in the middle was the most powerful, so she planned to kill the 4 weaker orcs first before dealing with the most powerful orc. Connie opened the door with the dagger and entered the room very smoothly. Meanwhile, the two orcs who were snoring loudly had no idea about it. The sharp dagger slit the throats of the two orcs easily and chopped off their heads. The two orcs didn't even have time to make a sound until they died. After wiping the dagger clean on the orcs' clothes, Connie entered the room on the far left again in the same way and used the dagger to chop off the heads of the two orcs. Bam! Right at this moment, the half-closed door was kicked open and a tall orc stood at the door. When he saw Connie throwing an orc's head on the ground, his expression changed slightly, and he said, "It's you." Connie also panicked when she saw that orc who suddenly appeared. Why did this fellow wake up? However, after seeing that fellow's face clearly, the flames of hatred burned in her eyes again. It was this fellow who killed her mother. That orc raised his long saber and coldly said, "Humph, I didn't expect you to send yourself to me. You even killed a few of my brothers. Today, I will carry your stab." With a soft sound, the tip of a sword pierced through his heart, interrupting his words. Rex gently pushed away the orc who died with his eyes wide open and looked at Connie, who was covered in blood, as he said, "Since you want to kill everyone, then start from the most powerful one. That way, even if there are any accidents, it can be easily settled." Got it. Got it, master. Connie looked at Rex and nodded vigorously. Then, she jumped into his arms and started sobbing softly. Chapter 1292. After saying goodnight to Amy and Irina, Meg went to the study alone. He took out a pen and paper and began to sketch the design. Based on his calculations, the night elves would reach Chaos City in another 2 days. By then, he would have to arrange a place for them to stay and a complete textile factory. The Hill had already started to manufacture steam engines in batches. Meg should be able to get 10 steam engines from her by purchasing them. What he had to solve now was the textile machine. When he was writing his thesis, he had done some research on some inventions from the Middle Ages. Hence, it was not difficult to design a textile machine powered by a steam engine. Compared to a steam engine, the textile machine's technological standards were much lower. He should be able to solve it in Mabai next door. After finishing the textile machine blueprint overnight, Meg drew a simple design of the staff dormitory. According to the university's standards of 4-person dormitory, it would be the Night Elves dormitory. Anyway, the empty space was big enough, so the space could be built as big as possible. He would find a large dwarven construction team tomorrow, and it would be completed in 2 days. On the big bed, Amy snuggled in Irina's arms as she stroked her flat tummy and asked, "Mother, when are you and Father going to give birth to a little brother or sister for me to play with?" This, Irina pondered for a while before asking Amy, "Do you want a little brother or sister?" "Little sister," Amy answered without even thinking. She then added, "The Palmer family's little sister is super cute and soft. It's very comfortable to pinch." Irina looked at Amy's glowing eyes and smiled. She scratched her nose gently and said, "But I want to give all my love to Amy. Just like now, I'm only hugging you." Amy shook her head with a smile and said, "It's okay. You love Amy. I love the little sister, and the little sister loves Father. In this way, we will be a loving family. Isn't that great?" "I see." Irina pondered. If she were to have another child, she couldn't do it alone. The Spectre Archipelago was located in the Boundless Sea, and it got its name from the fact that a layer of gray mist lingered above the archipelago all day long. Those islands of different sizes were occupied by the various Abyss Devils. A large island near the center was controlled by the Abyss Demon race. At the bottom of the 2 nearly vertical cliffs, there were many magnificent stone palaces. At this moment, in one of the grandest halls, the plump abyssal overlord was standing on the main seat. He looked at the various leaders and loudly said, "This time, the 10 demon tribes have gathered here to form an alliance and then negotiate with the king of the Roth Empire. If we conquer the entire continent, we'll decide which areas will belong to us and which will belong to them. Do you have any opinions on this matter? Making a deal with humans? That's a race even more treacherous than goblins. We, the Flaming Tribe, don't trust humans," a demon covered in flames said loudly. That's right. Who do humans think they are? They only have a lousy sword and a stick, and they want to divide the world equally with us. This kind of alliance is really embarrassing. A tall and big demon said arrogantly. Do you dare to say this to Alex and Julian face to face? The vampire ancestor sneered as he drank a mouthful of blood. That tall and big demon choked. He looked at the vampire ancestor with a red face, but he still didn't dare to agree. Meanwhile, the hall suddenly became much quieter because of this. Everyone had heard the news 2 days ago. Alex had killed Borg, and once again displayed his strength that far exceeded that of an ordinary 10th-tier powerhouse. Previously, he had killed the spatial demon patriarch, Benson, which directly put the spatial demon's position as one of the 10 great demon tribes in jeopardy. As for Crassus and Julian, the two of them had worked together to slaughter the cannibals, and had also left a deep impression on the demons. They had to admit that the humans, who were looked down upon by the demons back then, had developed rapidly for hundreds of years. With their huge population base, they had a powerful strength that couldn't be ignored by the other races. We vampires don't have many people in the first place, and we don't need any territory. You can play with things like fighting for territory. We vampires won't participate in any wars, and we don't need to divide any territory. The vampire ancestor drank the bright red blood in the cup in one gulp, then stood up. He opened his hands, and a pair of huge black wings appeared behind him. In the blink of an eye, he turned into a black shadow and disappeared from the hall. As timid as a mouse. Even if he can fly, he's just a mouse that can fly. The demon who was insulted earlier curled his lips and sneered. Whoosh! A half-meter-long black iron plate flew in from outside the hall and nailed between the demon's legs. That demon subconsciously got up and stepped back. With a rip, a big hole appeared in his pants. He quickly reached out to press on his crotch with an awkward expression. After the vampire ancestor left, the expressions of the leaders of the various races began to change. After that, there weren't many who clearly expressed that they wanted to join the alliance. This gathering was considered to have ended on a bad note. After business hours the next morning, Meg first went to the blacksmith shop in Mumbai and asked him to help make a few sets of textile machines. Mr. Mack, this machine is a little big. If you need it urgently, I can find a few familiar blacksmiths to make it together. I can deliver it to you in 2 days. Mumbai looked at the blueprint carefully for a while and said to Meg, Okay, but because this thing is a little special, it needs to be kept a secret. If you find other blacksmiths, you still have to take the parts apart. Meg nodded. Well, I understand. I'll take it apart and find someone to make it. Mumbai nodded. Mr. Mack had a lot of strange ideas, but in order to not be plagiarized by others, it was normal to pay attention to it. After coming out of the blacksmith shop in Mumbai, Meg went to the Buffett Manor to look for Hill. Finally, under the guidance of his assistant, he saw Hill at a bank. Mr. Meg, you want 10 steam engines? Hill put down the bill in her hand and looked at Meg. Yes, I plan to use the steam engine to build a textile factory. Meg nodded. He did not plan to hide this matter. Oh, Mr. Meg, have you thought about how to commercialize the steam engine? Shear looked at Meg with a surprised expression. Her engineers were all researching how to use the steam engine outside of the locomotive. Even though they had made some progress, they still hadn't been able to implement any concrete projects. Let's test the water first. I bought a factory in the north of the city, but I don't know how effective it will be. Meg smiled. I see. Hill saw that Meg was unwilling to reveal the details. She thought for a while and smiled. Mr. Meg is opening a factory. I wonder if I can join in the fun, invest some money, and get some shares? The factory is still a wasteland. Miss Hill, aren't you afraid that this investment will go down the drain? Meg asked in return. I may be worried about other people, but when it's Mr. Meg, I'm not worried. Even if it goes down the drain, I'm willing to do it. Hill smiled. Meg thought for a while and said, In that case, Miss Hill will invest 10 million copper coins and 10 steam engines. You'll get 10% of the shares. What do you think of this investment method? I think it's not bad. Hill wrote a Buffett Bank's note and pushed it to Meg. She smiled and said, The 10 steam engines can be handed over to Mr. Meg tomorrow. Tell me the address, and I'll send someone to deliver it. Chapter 1293. The negotiation with the Hill went much smoother than expected, and they managed to get an angel investment. After signing the contract, Meg left the bank. 10 million copper coins and 10 steam engines in exchange for 10% of the shares. Actually, Meg wasn't greedy at all. The textile industry market wasn't small. Although Meg only wanted to find something for the Night Elves to do at the moment, so that they wouldn't be bored out of their minds. Once the textile factory powered by steam engines started operating, it would be a place where the Night Elves would have a steady stream of military funds. Meg could fork out 10 million copper coins himself, but he knew very well that he couldn't earn all the money himself. Letting a little profit go to the Hill would be very beneficial for opening up sales and cash flow in the future. Young mistress, he only said some empty words and asked for 10 million copper coins. Isn't this a little too hasty? The assistant said to the Hill, who was checking the bill. Perhaps Mr. Meg is thinking about how much profit he gave me. The Hill didn't look up, but a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. If he's willing to become a businessman, there aren't many people on the Norland continent who can earn more money than him. The assistant was silent. Young mistress was very good at reading people and rarely made mistakes. Meg went to the construction workshop in the east of the city and found a strong dwarf construction team. He signed the construction contract for the construction of the factory's staff dormitory and the renovation of the factory at a price of 5 million copper coins. The dwarf contractor checked the blueprint carefully and then went to the site with Meg. After hearing Meg's request, he nodded and said, "The blueprint is a little complicated. We will complete the construction according to the blueprint in 2 days. You can pay us the balance after that. It's a pleasure working with you." Meg shook hands with him. He could find a cheaper construction team, but only this construction team could guarantee that the construction would be completed in 2 days. When Meg returned to the restaurant, Irina was sitting behind the counter and rubbing Ugly Duckling's fat face out of boredom. Ugly Duckling rolled its eyes with a dejected expression, but it didn't dare to say anything despite its fury. Only then did Irina let go of Ugly Duckling's round face. She turned to Meg and asked, "How was it? Did it go smoothly?" We've already found the construction team. The construction will start today, and it will be completed by the day after tomorrow. This will ensure that the Night Elves will have a place to stay when they come to Chaos City. The machine has also begun to be customized, and it won't be long before it can be put into use. Meg smiled and nodded. "What does this factory do?" Irina asked. Meg suddenly remembered that he hadn't told Irina about this. He quickly explained, "The textile factory is a factory that makes cotton into cotton cloth. However, the production has been changed from manual production to machine production to increase the output." Oh, Irina pondered for a while, but still couldn't understand what machine could replace manual labor. She could only nod and pretend to understand. Then, she curiously asked, "Then, what's the name of this factory?" Meg was really stumped by the question. He had been thinking about the factory and the machines for the past few days and hadn't seriously considered the name of the company. He asked Irina, "Do you have any ideas?" Irina thought for a while and said, "If the restaurant is called Mamie's, then the factory will be called IMI Textile Factory." "What about me?" Meg asked meekly. "Then, didn't you think of me when you came up with the name of the restaurant?" Irina asked as she looked into Meg's eyes. Meg opened his mouth slightly, but didn't know what to say. He could only nod and said, "All right, let's call it IMI then." What could he do? He couldn't win against her. "I thought about it on the way here today." The news of the Night Elves establishing a foothold in Chaos City would spread very quickly, and many people would definitely set their eyes on the factory. Hence, to avoid some trouble, we have to sever the relationship between the restaurant and the factory for the time being, Meg said after confirming the name of the company. If those fellows set their eyes on the restaurant now, it would indeed be quite troublesome. Irina nodded. Although Chaos City was a relatively safe place, Amy was still young, after all, and Meg hadn't fully recovered his power yet. Once their enemies came looking for them and plotted against them, they would be in a very passive situation. Irina pondered for a while and said, "Then, how about this? I won't manage the restaurant anymore. I'll go to the factory to be my boss, and you be the restaurant's boss. We're both bosses. That works too. Tell the public that I've invested in the company. Because the Night Elves' labor force is relatively cheap, I've chosen to accept all the Night Elves and recruited you to be the leader of the company. Meg nodded. Although the traces were a little obvious, this explanation seemed pretty good on the surface. What do you think about the peace talks between the races in a month's time? Irina asked Meg again. Meg solemnly said, judging from the current situation, there's a high possibility that the talks will fall through. Apart from a few weaker races, all the strong races have a very strong desire to redistribute their territories. They're also keen on restarting the racial war and using force to reset the territory. If it's only a month's time, I'm afraid the Night Elves won't be able to overthrow the Wind Force rule. Irina shook her head with a hint of worry in her eyes. Once the racial war started, how the elves were going to protect themselves would become a huge problem. The racial war will engulf every race and bring about endless chaos and suffering. Therefore, we have to try our best to prevent the war from restarting. Meg walked to the mural on the map of the Norland continent and looked at the territories that had been divided by the various races. A storm was about to sweep across the continent, and in places that they couldn't see, there were clouds of black fog appearing quietly. Meg still didn't know what this meant. What can we do? After 100 years of development, the original balance between the various races on the continent has been broken. What we have to do is to bring it back to balance, and buy more time for the integration of the entire continent. Meg used his finger to draw a circle on Chaos City in the middle of the map. Just like Chaos City, since the various races can coexist peacefully in a city and see the Norland continent as a bigger city, why can't they coexist peacefully as long as they can break the borders and exchange what they need? Interesting. Irina was deep in thought as she tilted her head to look at Meg. She suddenly felt that the way he thought about problems seemed to be a little different. He started to think about other things besides swords. Meg retracted his gaze from the map and looked at Irina as he said, "We only have a month's time to make the various races give up on restarting the war. I made some plans, but I don't know if it's feasible. Do you want to take a look?" "I don't want to see it now." Irina shook her head and moved closer to Meg. She curled her lips slightly and said, "Little Meg told me last night that she wants a little sister." Chapter 1294. Ahem, ahem. She likes little girls. When George's child was born, she really liked it. Meg nodded with a smile and pretended not to understand. He stole a glance at Irina. Why did she suddenly mention this? Doesn't she know that the situation is tense now? Does he dare to make a baby? Is that so? Then do you like her? Irina asked Meg with a smile. Of course I like her. She's a little girl. She's as cute and obedient as little Amy. Who would like her? Meg nodded as a matter of course. He took a sip of goji berry water from the thermos flask at the side. This winter really makes one's mouth dry. Irina looked at Meg with an increasingly interesting gaze. She liked to see Meg's uneasy look. Although he was a mighty dragon slayer in front of others, he would still blush awkwardly in front of her. She suddenly leaned close to Meg's ear and whispered, "Then, when are we going to have another one?" "Oh my God." Meg's legs turned to jelly. "What's going on?" Ding! The restaurant's unlocked door was pushed open, and Phyrus faltered slightly at the sight of Irina and Meg, who were standing rather close to each other. Meg and Irina also looked at Phyllis at the same time and narrowed their eyes. Kill her to silence her. That was the first thought that popped up in Phyllis's mind. "Oh, Phyllis, you're here. I was just talking to Princess Irina about you." "I didn't expect you to come," Meg said with a smile as he quietly moved to the side. "Talking about me?" Phyllis looked at Meg in surprise. "So the boss and the princess were talking about me. Could it be that the princess wants to give me to the boss as a gift of gratitude?" Phyllis's face turned red at the thought of this. Although she wanted to serve the princess, if she really had to sacrifice herself for the Night Elves, then I built a factory with him to house the Night Elves. The cafeteria lacks someone to cook, so I plan to let you be the head chef. Irina glared at Meg before slumping back in her seat lazily. She grabbed Ugly Duckling, which was retreating backward, and rubbed its chubby face as she spoke to Phyrus. "Head chef?" Phyllis was slightly stunned. It turned out that he didn't want her to devote herself to him. She breathed a sigh of relief, but also felt an inexplicable sense of loss. Yes, I heard from the princess that you were in charge of the night elves' food arrangements in the catacombs back then. You're definitely competent for this job. Meg also smiled and nodded. This was the problem that he and Irina had discussed last night. It was a very suitable excuse to use it now. Okay, I'll try my best to bring you delicious food. Phyllis nodded. Contributing to the night elves was something that she should do. Furthermore, with her experience in the catacombs, she wasn't as fearful of being the head chef as before. Meg nodded. This way, the night elves' logistical problem was solved. Now, they only had to wait for the night elves to arrive at Chaos City. Then, you guys continue with your discussion. I'll go and prepare the ingredients. Phyllis walked towards the kitchen. I'll go and make some preparations too. Meg glanced at Irina, who was staring at him, and quickly ran towards the kitchen as if he was escaping. Who could stand that? Coward. Irina sneered. She pinched Ugly Duckling's chubby face and said, Little fat duckling, you'll get greasy if you grow too fat. You have to exercise more. Ugly Duckling, which was squinting from being pinched, suddenly opened its eyes and looked at Irina in horror. It's all right. You're still young. It's too early to talk about braising or steaming. Irina consoled Ugly Duckling as she stroked its head. Meow. Ugly Duckling's fur stood up, and it lay on Irina's lap, shivering. It was close to noon, and the employees came to the restaurant one after another. The new employee, Reyna, greeted everyone awkwardly. She had taken off her old jacket and was wearing a brand new black and white chef's suit inside. It was similar to Meg's, but it was a woman's suit, and the tailoring was very fitting. Reyna, you look so spirited in the chef suit. You're just like a chef, Yabamiya said to Reyna enviously. Thank you, but I'm still an apprentice now, Reyna said humbly with a smile on her face. It's all right. Your nose is so sharp. You'll definitely learn it very quickly, Yabamiya encouraged. Reyna, come in for a while, Meg called out from the kitchen. All right. Reyna quickly strode into the kitchen and looked at Meg with a nervous expression. Just like this morning, you don't have to do anything for lunch. You just have to watch me cook, but you have to decide what the first dish you're going to learn is going to be, Meg said to Reyna as he washed his hands. Reyna nodded. Relax a little. Cooking isn't an easy task, but it should be interesting. Only then will you be able to create dishes with soul, Meg said with a smile. You could see that Reyna was a little nervous. Reyna faltered slightly upon hearing that, but a smile quickly appeared on her face. To her, cooking was indeed an interesting and blissful thing. Even though she had stood beside the stove for over an hour in the morning and watched Meg cook, she still felt that it was countless times more interesting than spacing out in the office. Meg washed his hands and began to make their own lunch. Reyna's talent allowed Meg to see the possibility of cultivating a successor quickly. He might need to disappear frequently in the future, which was undoubtedly unacceptable to the restaurant's regulars. If Reyna could learn his dishes, even if it was just a few, at least the restaurant could be maintained open. It was better than nothing. Phyllis's talent was not bad, but she had to take care of the night elves' food and didn't have much time to learn to cook. She could only be temporarily excluded. After the lunch rush, Meg took off his apron, took a sip of water from his thermos, and let out a long sigh of relief. Every business hour was like a long, intense battle. Boss, I want to learn how to cook hot pot, Reyna said as she walked up to Meg. Hot pot? Meg looked at Reyna with a little surprise. He had made all the dishes on the menu today, but he didn't make hot pot. He didn't expect Reyna to choose hot pot as her first dish. Yes, I was able to join the restaurant because of hot pot, so I want to learn how to cook hot pot as my first dish. Reyna nodded firmly. All right, then we'll start learning how to make a pot of thick soup at noon. Meg thought for a while and nodded. Hot pot was good. If Reyna could master hot pot, she could support half of the restaurant. It was much more reliable than other dishes. Was the new generation of hot pot queen going to appear under his guidance? Meg suddenly had some expectations. Chapter 1295. To make a pot of delicious soup, The most important thing was the control of the fire. Not only did it have to bring out the aroma of the bones, but the soup could not be too thick. This was not only related to time, but experience was also very important. Raina stood at the side and watched Meg process the bones. She remembered how to add the required spices at the right time. To her surprise, other than a small amount of cooking wine and ginger, Meg didn't add too many condiments and spices. He didn't chop off the bone, either. Instead, he used a big whole bone. The purer the bone broth, the better. This will determine the most basic taste of your hot pot. Using complete bones is to prevent unnecessary risks of broken bones during the boiling process. Now, cover the lid and simmer on low heat for 4 hours. The thick broth will be ready. Meg covered the lid of the big pot, took a small pot from the side, and put it on the stove. He then took a few small bones from the fridge and looked at Raina. "Do you want to try?" Now, Raina was slightly stunned. She only watched Meg do it once, and Meg asked her to do it directly. "I think you can do it well." Meg nodded and gave up the position of the stove. Looking at Meg's trusting eyes, Raina hesitated for a moment, but still chose to take a few steps forward. She closed her eyes and recalled what Meg had done before, as well as her own understanding. Soon, she opened her eyes and picked up a bone. Although this bone was only a joint, it was much thicker than the usual pig bones. The porcelain white surface of the bone had some bright red, minced meat stuck to it. Although it was raw meat, it did not have the slightest unpleasant smell of meat. Instead, it emitted a faint fragrance. What a strange bone. What pig's bone is this? Raina curiously thought in her heart. She rarely bought meat. Occasionally, when she got off work in the evening, she would go to the market to buy a bone to make soup for her mother. They were all bare bones without any minced meat. After the boss became familiar with her, he would give her half of it and half sell it to her. She washed the bones, marinated them simply, poured cold water into the pot, and boiled it on high heat. A series of steps were done in an orderly manner. He treated this big kitchen as his own small kitchen and tried his best to do it well. Meg, who was standing at the side, nodded slightly. Just as he had expected, Raina was not a novice when it came to cooking, and her learning ability was extremely fast. What was even rarer was that she didn't learn mechanically. She had her own habits and ideas when it came to certain operations. These details were the result of long-term cooking habits. For a chef, it was also a unique trait that was different from other chefs. The removal of the minced meat should be done more cleanly. The customers shouldn't have meat in their hot pot that they didn't order. Such a gift seems good, but might cause some customers trouble. Meg looked at Raina and said, "Also, the removal of the bone broth's foam should be more thorough. The controllable loss of the broth is to obtain a more exquisite and rich broth. Some of the foam may cause the broth's texture to not reach the level I want." "But wouldn't this be too wasteful?" Raina said hesitantly. Meg glanced at the minced meat that he had shaved off from the big bone earlier, shook his head, and said, "As a chef, it's not a good thing if all the ingredients are used perfectly in a dish. Different parts of the ingredients are used in different dishes. Clever combinations and choices can collide to create a wonderful taste. As for stewing, that's the lowest level of cooking. Combinations and choices." Raina was deep in thought. She felt as if a door had suddenly opened in her mind. Her imagination that was restricted by poverty broke free from its cage and flew to a higher place. Making the right ingredients appear in the right places is what an excellent chef should do. Meg looked at Raina with a smile. "It's okay. You'll slowly understand." "And I understand." Raina nodded. She looked at her small pot and said, "Then this pot of broth, pour it out and start again." Meg had already taken out a few more bones and placed them on the chopping board. "Pour out?" Raina was slightly shocked. These were all good bones. She had never seen such bones in the market. Was it going to be wasted because of her mistake? Yes. Meg nodded. He had no intention of negotiating. Raina's movements were a little stiff as she turned off the fire. She carried the pot of broth to the dishwashing counter. Although it had only been cooked for a while, the fragrance of the meat was already overflowing. The white broth only needed to be cooked for a few more hours to become a delicious broth. And because of her mistake, such a precious pot of bone broth was going to be poured out. Raina's eyes were full of regret. Walking to the dishwashing counter, Raina held the pot of broth. However, she did not pour the broth into the sink for a long time. Meg looked at Raina quietly. Raina did indeed have a good cooking foundation. Although it was unorthodox, with a little training, she should be able to quickly become a standard. Compared to the operation, Raina's biggest problem was her thinking. Or rather, it was the cooking thinking of most housewives in this world. The appropriate choice was the cornerstone of making delicious food. If she could not change this thinking, she would never be able to become a qualified chef. He would use the same standards for Raina as the system's requirements for him. This was the basic respect for the customer. He wanted to see Raina make her own decisions. Raina, who stood hesitantly by the sink for a while, turned around and looked at Meg. She looked at Meg with a sincere gaze and said, "Boss, I know my problem. But it's a pity to pour out this pot of broth like this. Can I bring her home? This is a failed product. I never let a failed product be taken out of my kitchen." Meg shook his head. There was a trace of disappointment in his heart. "But the one who made a mistake is me. This pot of broth itself is not wrong. Instead of pouring it into the sink, why not let it achieve its proper value?" Raina looked at Meg with some confusion. Her eyes were slightly red. "Raina, failure isn't something to be afraid of. You just need to know where you fell and then stand up to continue moving forward. However, you have to pay a price when you fail, right?" Meg frowned slightly. This maiden seemed to be more stubborn than he had imagined. Chapter 1296. So that's how it is. Meg looked at Raina with some surprise. Looking at the girl who was trying hard to keep tears in her eyes and show a strong appearance, he suddenly felt a little guilty. What made his soul tremble even more was the phrase, "maintain reverence for food." Perhaps it was because after he was born, Elder Yuan gradually let everyone eat too much, and he had never worried about the lack of food and money. After coming to this world, the never-ending ingredients in the test field for the god of cookery and the system's ingredients that could be replenished at any time made him have no special concept of how difficult it was to obtain ingredients. In his eyes, except for the tenderloin that could be cut into steaks and the brain that could be used to make beef kebabs, how the system handled the rest of the meat was not within his scope of consideration. After the pig bones used for stewing soup were taken from the 5th-grade golden shell wild boar, he had never worried about whether the remaining pork would be abandoned. Yes, he regarded the ingredients as consumables that could be squandered, and he would throw the failed food into the kitchen waste bin without any pity. Although he gradually became enthusiastic and looked forward to cooking, he still did not have enough reverence for food. In this world, how many people were struggling to fill their stomachs? Meg thought of Jessica and the group of children, as well as Amy before he came to this world. He thought of Amy holding the pancake that she bought with a copper coin. The pancake was as hard as a rock, but she ate it with great relish. Those children understood the preciousness of food better than he did, and they had the same reverence for food as Raina. He, who had never experienced a lack of food, what right did he have to refute the reverence and preciousness of others for food with that ridiculous self-persistence? Or the so-called principle? "Sorry, I think I was wrong." Meg looked at Raina apologetically. I didn't mean that. How could you be wrong? I shouldn't have said those words." Raina looked flustered, suddenly realizing that her words just now seemed a little too extreme. On her first day of work, she actually refuted the boss in public and even caused the boss to apologize. She wouldn't lose her job because of this, right? No, you're right. As a chef, I should have enough respect for food. Mag shook his head and smilingly said to Raina, "If you don't mind, you can bring this pot of soup back and share it with your mother. I think Annie would like this soup that your daughter made on her first day at work. Is that really okay?" Raina looked at Meg. There were no impurities in his clear eyes, and his gentle smile was so reassuring. Of course. Meg walked over, took the pot of soup from Raina's hands, and put it back on the stove. He turned on the fire and continued to stew. Then, he looked at her and said, "But we still have to keep in touch. We'll have to rely on you for the hot pot soup tonight. Boss. Raina finally couldn't stop the tears rolling in her eyes. She turned sideways and quickly wiped her tears, then immediately turned to look at Meg and nodded seriously. She walked back to the cutting table, picked up the boning knife, and carefully and seriously dealt with the minced meat attached to the bones. It's good to be thrifty. Meg looked at Raina's careful and serious appearance, and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. The feeling of breaking his principles didn't make him feel uncomfortable. Instead, he had some different ideas. His perspective and thinking about this world were still somewhat narrow. Watching Raina remove the foam from the boiling soup, then cover the lid and turn the fire down, Meg nodded with satisfaction. This time, you made great progress. But when dealing with the minced meat on the bones, you can try some techniques. In just one afternoon, Raina had successfully mastered how to boil a pot of thick soup that met the requirements of hot pot. This also made Meg, who was tortured in the test field for the god of cookery, very envious. Something like talent was really fucked up. The dinner service starts at 5 o'clock. You can go home and have dinner with Annie. Take these dishes back and have hot pot tonight. Meg handed a lunchbox and the pot of thick soup to Raina. I only want the soup. I can't take these dishes. Raina quickly waved her hand and only took the pot of soup. We're also having hot pot tonight, so I didn't prepare your share. Meg smiled and pointed at the red soup boiling in the pot. Thank you, boss. Raina deeply bowed to Meg and said gratefully, Go, you still have to come to the restaurant later. Meg said with a smile. Okay. Raina took the lunchbox and said goodbye to everyone. She walked briskly to the entrance of the restaurant. She couldn't wait to let her mother try the thick soup and hot pot that she had personally cooked. Last night, she said that she would make hot pot for her mother if she had the chance in the future. She just didn't expect that day to come so soon. It seems like you like her very much. Irina, who had gone out at noon, looked at Meg and said with a smile, An excellent disciple. This is called cherishing talent. Meg said with a calm face. He had already confirmed that Raina would be able to take over the designated hot pot area in no time. Such a genius was exactly what he had been looking for. I planned to go to the endless sea realm. Irina walked into the kitchen and said in a voice that only the two of them could hear. Huh? Meg looked at Irina with a little surprise. I planned to kill a demon. Weren't there a few guys who didn't die from the incident 3 years ago? Irina said calmly. Where are you going? After making arrangements for the night elves. Meg looked at Irina. He knew very well that she wouldn't change her mind easily once she made up her mind. Furthermore, if his power allowed him to, he also wanted to kill those scumbags who were still alive. Beep, beep, beep. Warning. There was a serious leak in the marine lobster breeding base. 300,000 lobsters escaped the base. The breeding base's net was damaged by corrosion and couldn't be repaired. The number of escaping lobsters is still increasing. Since there are no natural enemies around, it is very likely to cause serious damage to the local ecosystem. Emergency mission. Please head to the Endless Sea Realm lobster breeding base as soon as possible to remove the source of corrosion, repair the breeding base's net, and capture the escaping lobsters. Mission reward. Obtain the title of Lobster Hunter and 5 physical strength points. Mission failure. Physical strength points return to 0. At this moment, the system's urgent voice suddenly sounded in Meg's mind. Meg was slightly taken aback. Wasn't this mission a little too weird? System, you want me to catch 300,000 lobsters? Are you out of your mind? Why don't you go to heaven? Meg couldn't help but complain. Chapter 1297. According to the system's 3 rules, if the ecosystem of this world collapses because of the system will be reset. What do you mean? The system and the host are deeply bound. If the system is reset, it means that the host will be erased. Fuck, this is a rogue clause. Meg raised his eyebrows. He didn't expect himself to be tied to the same rope as the system. Moreover, the system will be reset. This was too useless, wasn't it? The system is a support and was born because of the host. In order to prevent some systems from taking over the host, the heavenly axiom set the 3 rules. All systems must follow the rules, the system said mechanically. Meg didn't want to discuss the terms too much. It was not something he could decide. Instead, he said, forget about the 300,000 crayfish, but that's the endless sea realm. Aren't crayfish freshwater prawns? Why did you fucking raise them in the sea? So be it. How could you let the crayfish escape from your system's farm? Aren't you being too unprofessional? This is the super devil crayfish bred by the system after genetic recombination of crayfish, Australian crayfish, and devil crayfish from this world. It can adapt to the endless sea realm very well. This kind of crayfish is not only big and meaty, but it also solves the problem of crayfish being difficult to handle and dirty. It's a top-grade ingredient no matter if it's used to make garlic or spicy crayfish. Moreover, the leak this time wasn't the system's fault. It was an unknown black fog that suddenly appeared at the edge of the crayfish farm and severely corroded the net, causing the leak, the system said, feeling wronged. Is it the black fog that appeared on board? Meg was slightly shocked. The system had mentioned the existence of the black fog to him before. He didn't expect it to appear in the endless sea realm this time. According to the system's analysis, the two have the same composition and should come from the same place. According to the system's monitoring, the range of the black fog is rapidly expanding. The creatures within the black fog are beginning to show signs of mutation. Then the crayfish can't be eaten? Meg stared. As a crayfish lover, his first reaction was probably like this. The system has already quarantined the sea area where the mutation occurred. The mutated creatures are all left in this area. Moreover, the mutation takes time to accumulate. Being exposed to the black fog for a short period of time will not cause the crayfish to mutate. Therefore, the 300,000 crayfish that escaped earlier can be eaten. However, because the black fog could not be destroyed, the isolation net could not be repaired. They could only rebuild another isolation net 300 meters away. Currently, the black fog was rapidly expanding. According to its expansion speed, it would threaten the second isolation net in 72 hours, causing the risk of a second leak. Therefore, please head to the boundless sea realm as soon as possible to clear the black fog and control the spread of the crayfish. The system said seriously. Meg rolled his eyes in his heart. Even so, 300,000 crayfish was enough to give him a headache. Demons were not fishermen. The mission is sudden. In order to allow the host to complete the mission more smoothly, the host will receive a full set of crayfish cooking recipes after completing the stage mission of clearing the black fog. It includes spicy crayfish, garlic crayfish, 13-spice crayfish, steamed crayfish, chilled crayfish, and many other cooking methods. Oh, there's such a thing. Meg's eyes lit up when he heard that. The mainstream cooking methods of crayfish were all complete. Spicy crayfish was his favorite. Moreover, if he had this set of recipes, he had a new idea on how to deal with the 300,000 escaping crayfish. In this world, as long as something was delicious, there was no need to worry about it increasing in price. Why would there be a need to worry about it overflowing? Why? You don't want me to go? Irina asked with a smile as she looked at Meg, who was suddenly stunned. No, I'm going to go with you. Meg shook his head with a smile. He had no choice. This trip to the boundless sea realm was unavoidable. He was also worried about letting Irina take the risk alone. Thus, he would just treat it as a family of 3 going to the Demon Islands for a vacation. Besides, Meg also wanted to find out what the black fog was. Even the system could not do anything about it. Moreover, it had appeared on board before. Irina's light-type magic had a purifying effect on the black fog. Meg could save himself a lot of trouble by going with her. Otherwise, he would not be able to deal with the black fog with just a sword. You'd better stay in Chaos City to recuperate. Irina shook her head, but she was a little touched. Let's set off the day after tomorrow. Before that, I can only settle down the night elves briefly. I'm not going to the Demon Islands to kill people. I have something else to do, Meg said with a smile. All right. Irina stared at Meg for a while. Someone came in from outside. She nodded gently, washed her hands, and left the kitchen. Meg was not an impulsive person, so she was not worried about that. Mother, let me do it. Raina returned home and saw her skinny mother scooping porridge with difficulty. She quickly put down the lunchbox in her hand and quickly walked forward to take the bowl and spoon from her. Raina, why are you back? Didn't you say you were going to have dinner at the restaurant? Karen's asked Raina in surprise. Boss taught me how to make hot pot this afternoon. He asked me to bring it back for you to try. We won't be having porridge tonight. Let's have hot pot instead. Raina smiled as she put down the bowl and spoon. She helped Karen's to the table and then took out all the things that Meg gave her from the lunchbox one by one. There was even a small stove at the bottom. Karen's looked at all the dishes on the table and worriedly said to Raina, "Why did you take so many things?" "Raina, it's your first day at work. This is not good." Raina was also a little surprised that Meg gave her so many dishes. Duck intestines, tripe, beef. These dishes were priced at dozens or hundreds of copper coins on the menu, but they were all here. Just the ingredients on the table alone cost more than 2,000 copper coins. Boss is a good person. Don't worry, Mother. When I get my salary, I will return the money for today's meal to him. Just treat it as my first day at work, and I'll treat you to hot pot. Raina said with a smile. She took the stew pot that she usually used, put it on the small stove, and poured half of the soup she made at noon into it. Then she lit the fire, and the warm soup began to boil again. "Yes, I have to return it to him." Karen's nodded, and then suddenly coughed violently. "I boiled this bone soup for the whole afternoon. Drink some first." Raina quickly poured a bowl of bone soup and handed it to Karen's. Then she walked behind her and gently patted her back. She thought with some heartache, Mother's cough is getting worse. When this month's salary is paid, I have to take her to a good doctor. Chapter 1298. I'm fine. You don't have to worry about me. The boss is a good person. You have to work hard to repay him. Karen seemed to see Raina's thoughts. She squeezed out a smile on her pale face. She carefully picked up the bowl in front of her and sniffed it. Her eyes lit up and she said, "This soup smells so good. What bone is it made of?" The boss said it's pig bone, but I think the pig bone is a little different from the ordinary pig bone. It may be a more precious breed. Raina looked at Karen's with some expectation and urged, "Mother, try it and see if the taste is different from the one I stewed before. Today, I learned stewing soup from the boss for the whole afternoon." "Okay, I'll try it." Karen's nodded with a smile and took a sip of the soup. The temperature of the bone soup was just right. It tasted warm and fresh, and the taste bloomed in an instant. Even the inactive taste buds couldn't help but become restless. She swallowed a mouthful of soup, and the fragrance of the meat remained between her lips and teeth. How can this soup be so delicious? Karen's looked up at Raina with some surprise. Raina used to make some bone soup for her from time to time, but the taste of the bone soup today was many times better than the one she had made before. After swallowing it, the taste of the bone soup remained in her mouth and teeth. "Then drink more. There's still a lot in the pot." Raina smiled when she heard that. Since she got sick, her mother's appetite became worse and worse. Even if she made different kinds of food for her, she would eat very little every time. She didn't expect that the bone soup today would suit her taste. "Okay," Karen's nodded and continued to drink the soup with the bowl. Gulp, gulp. The bowl of thick soup went down her stomach in a short time. Raina saw that her mother's pale face had a little more color. She was happy and filled half a bowl of bone soup for her. "Raina, drink some too. You must be tired after learning to cook for a day." Karen's pulled Raina to sit down and filled a bowl of soup for her. Then she said with a serious face, "Your boss is a good person, and his cooking skills must be very good. Since you're learning from him, you must learn well. Don't let him down. In the future, you have to be more diligent in the restaurant. Help him if you can. It doesn't matter if you suffer some losses." "Okay, I'll remember." Raina nodded seriously and smiled. Because he didn't know how long he would be staying in the Boundless Sea realm, Mag focused on teaching Raina about the hot pot base and the details of it, as well as the demonstration of how to make it. He planned to let Raina maintain the reputation of the designated hot pot area before they set off, so that the restaurant could maintain its operating status. Raina learned very seriously and showed an excellent understanding of spices. Even if she had just come into contact with new spices, she could control the dosage very precisely with her keen sense of smell. "Raina, you have to come to the restaurant early tomorrow morning. I'm going to teach you how to make preserved egg and lean meat porridge." Meg looked at Raina and said, Be at the restaurant at 6 o'clock sharp. Okay, I'll be there on time. Raina nodded. Although she didn't understand why Meg was in such a hurry to teach her the second dish, she didn't ask much. After all, she hadn't even learned how to make the hot pot base. You did very well today. Tomorrow, you should be able to learn how to make a real red soup hot pot. Go back and have a good rest. Mag praised with a smile. This talent was indeed something that he couldn't be envious of. He had been tortured in the test field for the god of cookery because of this hot pot, but Rena had already trampled him under her feet with her amazing nose. Everyone left, and Gina also went upstairs to rest because she was tired. Meg locked the restaurant's door, leaving only Meg and his family of 3 in the restaurant. Let's go upstairs to rest too. Mag heaved a resigned sigh as he looked at the mother and daughter duo, who were discussing how to make a duck more delicious. Meow! Ugly Duckling jumped down from the counter and hugged Meg's leg as it shivered. Its big eyes were filled with tears, and it looked very pitiful. Father, do you think the duck should be roasted or stewed? Amy looked at Meg and asked. Then she said, I think roasted duck is delicious, and Mother thinks stewed duck is delicious. What do you think? Irina also looked at Meg with an expression that said, you know what I mean? This was a question that would kill him. Meg raised his eyebrows. He didn't expect to face such a troublesome question after a day of work. On one side was his precious daughter, and on the other was his beautiful wife. How the hell was he going to choose? Meg hesitated for a while. He looked down at Ugly Duckling, who was hugging his leg, and helplessly said, you choose the way to eat it. Meow. Ugly Duckling fell back in horror. Its eyes rolled back, and its legs stopped moving. It died very spiritually. It's dead. Amy squatted down and used her little finger to poke Ugly Duckling's stomach. She smilingly said, then we have our supper tonight. Let's eat roasted duck. Meow. Ugly Duckling woke up immediately. It buried its fat head in Amy's arms and cried out while licking her little hand. It did everything it could to act cute. All right. Don't worry, Ugly Duckling. We're not talking about you. You're still young. We won't eat you, Amy said with a smile as she pressed Ugly Duckling's head. Meow. Ugly Duckling seemed to heave a sigh of relief. You have to grow up quickly. When you become a big white swan, you'll be able to fly into the sky. Amy reached out to touch the little wing pattern on Ugly Duckling's back. Why haven't they grown out yet? Ugly Duckling nodded, as if to express its determination. Mother, do you think a swan is better roasted or stewed? I really want to eat roasted goose. Amy turned to Irina and asked. Meow. Ugly Duckling fainted in Amy's arms. After telling Amy a bedtime story, the little fellow quickly fell asleep in Irina's arms. Meg was just about to go next door to sleep when Irina, who was in her pajamas, called out to him. What are you going to do at the Demon Islands? Meg sat down by the bed and softly asked, do you still remember the black mist that appeared on Borg's body? That mist was a little strange. It had an aura that disgusted me. Also, the Tree of Life had been invaded by that black mist in order to help me. However, a big fish later on caused the black mist to dissipate a lot. I worked together with the Tree of Life to completely get rid of that black mist. Irina nodded. She still had lingering fears when she thought about that black mist. This black mist might have appeared on the Demon Islands again. I want to go and investigate to see what it is and then destroy it, Meg said. Chapter 1299. That black fog is indeed a little strange. But how did you know that it appeared on the Demon Islands? Irina looked at Meg with a puzzled expression. The Lantistians are living under the boundless sea realm now. They were the ones who told me. Meg said calmly. He wasn't lying to Irina on purpose. The existence of the system couldn't be known by others. This was one of the core principles of the system. The system had warned him many times not to tell others. Is it that group of mysterious men in black? What's their background? Irina asked curiously as she recalled the group of thugs in suits that descended from the sky. She still didn't know the background of this group of mysterious powerhouses. Lantis was a kingdom that existed on the Norland continent a long time ago. However, it sank thousands of years ago. Meg briefly explained the history of Atlantis, how they established contact, and how they promised to help him 3 times to Irina. So that's how it is. It means that you have raised a powerful army at the bottom of the sea, and it's the kind that others can't fathom at all. Irina nodded. She looked at Meg with a smile and said, "You put down your sword and picked up your cleaver. You're doing pretty well." "I can't help it. I'm just that outstanding." Meg sighed. Her talent was almost overflowing. "What a headache." TSK, TSK. Irina rolled her eyes and let him figure it out himself. "Oh yes, when I was fighting with Boar previously, I realized that your holy light magic had a very good purifying effect on that black fog. So before we kill, you might have to come with me to look for the black fog," Meg said. Holy light can purify the black fog? Irina was a little surprised to hear that. Obviously, this was the first time she knew about it. Yes, you hate that undead aura, and it should feel the same way about you. It's an existence that counters each other. Meg nodded. All right, I also want to find out what that thing is. How dare it touch the tree of life? Irina nodded in agreement. The next morning, Meg was woken up by the alarm clock. Rubbing his sleepy eyes, he walked to the window and opened the curtains. He looked at the dimly lit square in the distance. It had snowed again last night, and the whole square was covered in white again. Meg lowered his head and saw a figure wrapped in a cotton-padded jacket walking back and forth downstairs. From time to time, he would stomp his feet, leaving a trail of footprints in the snow. Why is Reyna here so early? Meg had set the alarm clock at 5:40, and the time he had agreed to meet with Reyna last night was 6 o'clock. Judging from the footprints on the snow, she must have been here for a while. Meg changed his clothes and went downstairs to open the door. He looked at Reyna, who was pacing around with her neck shrunk. Reyna, come in. Reyna looked up and was slightly surprised to see Meg standing at the door. She quickly straightened her body and nodded slightly to Meg. You're up. Come in and talk. It's cold outside. Meg stepped aside and waited for Reyna to enter the restaurant before closing the cold wind outside. The temperature outside was at least -10 degrees. He couldn't help but shiver when he opened the door. This silly girl was waiting outside like an idiot. Phew! Reyna entered the restaurant and gently exhaled the cold air. It was so warm in the restaurant. It was a completely different world from outside. Didn't we agree to arrive at 6 o'clock? Why are you here so early? Meg looked at Reyna, who was rubbing her red hands, and asked. I woke up when I heard the rooster crowing. I didn't know if it was 6 o'clock, so I came over, and I only waited for a while. Reyna put her hands behind her back and said with a smile, it was always better to be early than late. Her mother always said this to her. Meg suddenly realized that there was no such thing as a clock in this world. Whether it was a household clock or a magic watch, it could easily cost tens of thousands of copper coins. They were all things that only the rich could play with. Reyna's house obviously didn't have anything that could let her tell the time. Sit down and warm up for a while. I'll go wash up, Meg said to Reyna. He turned and went into the kitchen. He smashed a few pieces of ginger and threw them into the pot to boil. He threw in 2 pieces of brown sugar and closed the lid before going upstairs to wash up. Reyna gently pulled out a chair and sat on the edge. She took out her red hands and rubbed them. The temperature in the restaurant was very warm, and her body gradually began to recover. After a while, Meg came downstairs. Reyna quickly stood up. Sit down. Meg motioned for her to sit down and went into the kitchen. After a while, he came out with a bowl of brown sugar ginger tea. Drink some ginger tea to get rid of the cold. Thank you. Thank you, boss. Reyna was a little flattered as she took the ginger tea. The fragrance of the brown sugar and the spiciness of the old ginger rushed to her face along with the steam. The pottery bowl, which had isolated a lot of heat, was warm in her hands. Next time, if you come early, just knock on the door directly. Don't wait outside. Your hands are used to cook. It's not good to freeze them, Meg said with a serious face. Okay. Reyna nodded slightly. She had not drunk the ginger tea yet, but her heart was already warm. Sit down and drink it. After you finish it, it's almost time to start cooking the preserved egg and lean meat congee, Meg said with a smile and turned to walk into the kitchen. Reyna sat down again. She scooped up a spoonful of the ginger soup with a spoon, put it to her mouth, and blew on it before drinking it. The slightly hot ginger soup was slightly sweet. After swallowing it down her throat, the taste of the old ginger bloomed instantly. It burned all the way down her throat to her stomach and then spread to her limbs and bones. This ginger soup is so delicious. Raina's eyes lit up. She drank spoonful after spoonful. After standing in the cold wind for half an hour, her cold body began to heat up from the inside out. She felt warm all over, and small beads of sweat appeared on her forehead. After drinking the bowl of ginger soup, Raina hurriedly took off her big cotton-padded jacket. It was really too warm, and it was a warmth that came from the inside out. Raina moved the chair back to its original position. She carried the bowl that she had used into the kitchen and carefully asked, "What should I do next?" Meg took the bowl from Raina's hand and put it into the dishwasher at the side. He looked at her and said, "Put the bowl down. Next, we're going to make breakfast for the cleaners in the Aiden Square. They have to start cleaning at 4 a.m. every day despite the cold. So we're going to make a steaming bowl of preserved egg and lean meat congee for them to replenish their calories and energy." "You're really a good person," Raina said sincerely. Ding. Good person card +1. The system's voice sounded. The corner of Meg's mouth twitched. He tried to control his emotions and said with a smile, "Okay, let's start now. The congee has to be ready before 6:30 a.m. That's the breakfast time that I promised them." The Dwarven construction team was in the midst of the orderly construction. A 4-story dormitory building built with black stones had basically taken shape, and they were in the process of topping off the roof. This efficiency was indeed incomparable to that of an ordinary human construction team. The construction of the factory's workshop was also going on at the same time. The construction team reinforced the walls, replaced the roof beams, and replaced the roof tiles that leaked rain. Meg specially came over in the afternoon because the people on the hill had sent the steam engines over. He locked the 10 steam engines in the reinforced warehouse. At the moment, he didn't have time to fully renovate the factory. He could only start the construction after he returned from the Boundless Sea realm. However, after the dormitory building was built, the night elves would have a place to live. At least they could settle down first. "System, I'll order the bed and daily necessities directly from you. This is a big order," Meg said to the system as he walked out of the factory. It would take a lot of time to customize 1,000 beds, and buying 1,000 sets of daily necessities would also require shopping, so Meg might as well buy directly from the system. "My prawns are all gone. I'm not in a mood to sell beds," the system complained. "If the prawns are all gone, then all the more you have to sell the beds. Otherwise, if the prawns are all gone and the beds aren't sold, wouldn't it be a loss for both sides? Selling the beds and daily necessities to recoup some money, then selling everything to raise prawns again. Isn't that a good idea?" Meg said with a smile. "What you said makes sense," the system said hesitantly. Meg smirked and said, "That's right. 1,000 log single beds. It's best to use wood from the wind forest. It's simpler and more natural. The daily necessities should be simpler too, but the quality can't be too bad. Take a look. How much would it cost?" The price for a log single bed is 500 copper coins each. A set of daily necessities is 200 copper coins, including towels, toothbrushes, tooth cups, slippers, and pajamas. "How many sets do you need?" the system asked. "Let's set it at 1,500 sets." Meg thought for a while. Although there were only a little over 1,000 night elves now, ever since Chaos City was opened up to the elves, more and more wandering elves came to settle down in Chaos City. Some of them might join the night elves, so Meg planned to prepare for them in advance. "The total price is 1.05 million copper coins," the system answered. "So expensive?" Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. "This is a good price. Do you know how much system power it takes to cut a log from the wind forest, make it into a single bed, and then fly it to Chaos City? You won't be able to find another shop in Chaos City that offers such a price." "All right, then round it off." The system was silent for a long time before it reluctantly said, "All right, round it off." You can count 150,000 copper coins yourself. Don't deduct more, Meg replied naturally. All right. Host, what do you mean? Why did it become 150,000? Didn't I round it off? Meg said matter-of-factly. Host, you're cheating. Serious cheating. The system roared. Don't be anxious. It's a business. Let's talk about it slowly. Apart from the bed and daily necessities, I also want to connect the water to their dormitory. I've set up a washroom and toilet for each floor. Help me connect the pipes, install the showers and toilets, and build an underground reservoir. The water pressure must be enough to reach every floor of the dormitory, and the amount of water must be enough for the factory's daily operation. Calculate how much it will cost, Meg continued. If you don't tell me the round number clearly, I won't count it. All right. Let's count it as 1 million and round it off with 50,000. Let's focus on how much it will cost to build the pipes and water system. Meg didn't continue to tease the system. Even the dwarven construction team couldn't do something like connecting the water. At most, they could build a reservoir, but they wouldn't be able to pressurize the water to go upstairs. 3 dormitory buildings with an average height of 16 meters. To provide for 1,500 people and a textile factory's daily operation, a large reservoir will need to be built. At the same time, a set of electropressurization system, showers, toilets for each floor. The total cost of the project is 6,660,000 copper coins. The system quickly calculated. Chapter 1301. Plus the previous bed and daily necessities, 7 million copper coins. Meg simply said, the system's price was actually quite good. After all, no one in this world could make a water system. Not to mention other things, just the pipes were enough to make most of the construction teams stumped, not to mention the complicated pressurization system. The system fell into silence and seemed to be thinking. With this 7 million, the new crayfish cultivation is settled. When the crayfish grow up, we can sell them and earn back the money. Meg said with a smile. Deal. The system said decisively. Okay, after the dwarf construction team leaves, you can install it. Meg said with a smile. He was very satisfied with the result. However, the upgrading of the factory alone cost more than 10 million copper coins. Not only did he spend all the investment from the hill, but he also lost a few million. It was clear that it was not easy to do business. All right, system, are you short of money recently? Do you want to borrow a large loan from me? Meg asked. You want to borrow 3,000 and return 300,000? I'm a little scared. Don't be scared. How can there be such a trick? I have 300 million here. You can go and build a fishery or farm. The monthly interest will be 7 million. Meg said with a smile. Your interest is 10 times higher than the bank's deposit rate. The system retorted. How can you compare borrowing and saving money? When the bank lent you money, did it mention the deposit rate? If you don't want to borrow, then forget it. I'll just deposit it in Buffett Bank. Meg said confidently. I only need 100 million for 3 months. The interest is 7 million. The system gritted its teeth. Okay, the growth cycle of the big crayfish is 3 months? You don't care. You have to mortgage a loan. First, you don't have a car. Second, you don't have a house. Just mortgage a few farms. If you can't pay back the money on time, the farms will be mine. Meg's smile revealed the aura of a capitalist. Ding! The ownership of the Wind Forest Rice Farm is mortgaged successfully. Ding! The ownership of the Vision Forest Soybean Farm is mortgaged successfully. Ding! The ownership of the Endless Sea Crayfish Breeding Base is mortgaged successfully. Following the system's 3 notifications, 3 mortgage certificates appeared in Meg's mind. All right, you can transfer the 100 million to yourself. Meg nodded his head in satisfaction. 7 million copper coins were back. As expected, farming was not as profitable as banking. Back at the restaurant, Meg continued to instruct Raina on how to make hot pot soup. Mag was especially strict today. He threw away all the broth that didn't meet the standards. The red broth wasn't like the clear broth, which could be drunk as bone broth. Although Rena felt that it was a pity, she didn't ask them to stay. She only became more serious and meticulous when she was cooking. She only hoped that she would waste less ingredients. After countless failures, Meg used a small spoon to scoop up a spoonful of the red soup that Raina had just made. He blew on the hot air and put it into his mouth. He carefully savored the slightly spicy texture and the collision of various spices and the wonderful taste of the bone broth. He nodded his head in satisfaction and said, "And this pot of slightly spicy soup is not bad. It has already reached the standard of hospitality. Let's use this pot for our hot pot tonight." Raina, who had been nervous all this time, finally revealed a smile on her face. Today, she had heard many rejections from Meg's mouth. Even if it was only a slight difference, she still did not get approved. The moment she received approval, the sense of accomplishment was indescribable. Of course, the happiest thing was that she could finally stop wasting ingredients. Raina is so awesome. She learned how to make hot pot in 2 days. Yeah, this is too awesome. Yabamiya and the others all came forward to congratulate. However, they all saw Raina's efforts. Not everyone had the ability to find a balance between the hot and pungent spices. Thank you, everyone," Raina said with a smile. She felt sweet in her heart. The feeling of being recognized was really too blissful. In her previous job, she only received the pressure of being scolded at any time. But here, everything was different. Tonight, the guests ordered the slightly spicy hot pot soup. "You will be responsible for it." Meg looked at Raina and said, I will directly cook for the guests." Raina slightly opened her mouth and looked at Meg with some disbelief. She had just come to the restaurant for the second day, and Mamie's guests were notoriously picky. Could she really do it? "Don't worry, before serving it to the guest table, I will first confirm whether it is feasible," Meg said with a smile. Raina looked at Meg's trusting gaze and hesitated for a moment before nodding her head. In her heart, she secretly made up her mind to not let down the boss trust. After dinner, the busiest business time of the day began. Hot pot had already become a fixed meal appointment in some circles in Chaos City. The biggest difference every day was that after eating 3 spicy hot pot dishes in a row, they would order a clear soup hot pot to relax certain parts of the body before starting a new round of spicy hot pot. As the representative of the moderate, the slightly spicy hot pot was favored by many customers who were afraid of spicy and didn't want to eat anything too bland. "Uncle, let's order the slightly spicy hot pot. My teeth are much better now, so I can eat the slightly spicy hot pot." In the line, Vanessa tugged at Abraham's sleeve. She had had enough of the humiliation of being a pot in a pot. Even if it was just a slightly spicy hot pot, she was determined to step out of the clear soup hot pot. "Can you really eat it?" Abraham looked at Vanessa worriedly. Mr. Mack had told her not to eat anything too spicy. "Look, after using the Anon Bayao toothpaste, my teeth have turned white, and they are not bleeding anymore," Vanessa said with a grin. "You have really turned a lot whiter," Abraham said with surprise. Abraham exclaimed in surprise. Vanessa's teeth, which were originally covered in a layer of black filth, had indeed turned a few shades whiter. Although there were still some black spots in the severely corroded areas, the situation was visibly improving. "Yes, let's have a slightly spicy hot pot for dinner." Vanessa nodded happily. "I don't have the final say. We have to get Mr. Mack's approval. Now that you have seen the light at the end of the tunnel, you can't be willful and stop it." Abraham shook his head and passed the responsibility to Vanessa. "All right." Vanessa nodded. Although she really wanted to try the spicy hot pot, she could only give up if Mr. Mack said she couldn't eat it. The restaurant opened, and the line moved forward quickly. Vanessa walked to the door and stopped. She looked at Meg and said, "Mr. Mack, can I have the slightly spicy hot pot today? Look at my teeth. They are much better now." Meg looked at Vanessa, who was grimacing in pain. This princess of the Roth Empire had completely disregarded her image for the sake of a slightly spicy hot pot. Meg looked at Vanessa's teeth and nodded. "Your condition has indeed improved, but you have to eat less of the slightly spicy hot pot. Also, you have to rinse your mouth and brush your teeth immediately after eating." "All right, thank you, Mr. Mack." Vanessa nodded happily and skipped into the restaurant. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.